The wind screamed through the pines like a wounded animal as Rebecca Mitchell clutched her children closer, the thin wool shawl doing little against winter's fury. Thomas, her 10-year-old son, stood rigid beside her, his father's pocket watch, clutched so tightly in his small fist that his knuckles had turned white. Sophia, just 6, buried her face in her mother's skirts, her silence more terrifying than any cry could have been. Behind them, the Prescott homestead door slammed shut, with such force that it sent snow cascading from the roof, a final insult hurled at their backs. "You have until sundown to be off this property," Martha Prescott had declared, her voice as cold as the February air. "My brother's charity died with him." Rebecca could still feel the sting of Martha's words as she urged her children forward. 3 months a widow, and this was what remained of family loyalty. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you! The dirt road leading away from Pinewood Valley Settlement disappeared beneath fresh powder, leaving Rebecca with nothing but instinct to guide them. Daniel had been gone just 12 weeks, pneumonia taking him after a logging accident left him weakened, but his sister hadn't waited even that long before making her intentions clear. The Mitchell homestead technically belonged to Daniel's family, a fact Martha and her husband Jeremiah were quick to remind Rebecca at every opportunity. "Mama, my feet hurt," Thomas whispered, though she could tell he was trying to be brave. He had Daniel's eyes, deep brown and serious, and the same stubborn set to his jaw. "I know, sweetheart." Rebecca adjusted her grip on the small bundle of possessions Martha had generously allowed them to take. 1 change of clothes each, Daniel's shaving kit that Thomas had insisted on keeping, a single blanket, and the small leather-bound book of poetry Daniel had given her on their wedding day. Everything else, the life they had built over 7 years, now belonged to the Prescotts. Sophia stumbled beside her, the child's breath coming in small, white puffs. She hadn't spoken a word since Daniel died, not even to cry out in her sleep when the nightmares came. The doctor in town had called it shock of the spirit and said only time would heal it if anything could. Rebecca lifted her into her arms, though her own strength was failing. "Just a little further," she promised, though she had no destination in mind. The nearest town was Cedar Ridge, nearly 20 miles to the west. They wouldn't make it before nightfall, and the gathering clouds promised more snow before dusk. Thomas pulled at her sleeve, pointing toward a stand of pines where the snow seemed less deep. "We could rest there, Mama." Rebecca nodded, changing course toward the trees. She'd been a school teacher before marrying Daniel, well-versed in literature and arithmetic, but woefully unprepared for wilderness survival. Still, she knew enough to recognize that shelter was their first priority. The pine grove offered some protection from the wind, the thick branches creating a natural canopy. Thomas immediately began gathering fallen branches, mimicking what he'd seen his father do countless times when they'd gone fishing in summer. "Good thinking," Rebecca said, setting Sophia down on her blanket. The girl's lips had a bluish tinge that made Rebecca's heart clench with fear. She needed to get them warm, and soon. From her pocket, Rebecca withdrew the small tinderbox Martha hadn't known about. Daniel had always insisted she carry it, especially in winter. "The mountains demand respect," he told her once. "They give life with one hand and take it with the other." Her fingers trembled as she struck the flint, once, twice, 3 times, before a spark caught the dry moss she'd gathered. Thomas added the smallest twigs first, then gradually larger ones, until a modest fire crackled before them. Rebecca pulled, both children close, huddled around the flames, and tried to quiet the panic rising in her chest. They had no food save for a small pouch of dried apple slices and half a loaf of bread. No water, except what they could melt from snow. No plan beyond surviving until morning. "Will we die out here?" Thomas asked suddenly, his voice so small it nearly broke her. Rebecca swallowed hard, forcing conviction into her voice. No, we are Mitchells, and Mitchells don't give up. Your father used to say that, remember? Thomas nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the fire. He twisted the watch chain around his finger, a nervous habit he'd developed since Daniel's death. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted further. Rebecca kept the fire going with what branches Thomas could gather, but the cold seemed to seep into her very bones. Sophia had finally fallen into a fitful sleep, while Thomas fought to keep his eyes open, determined to help keep watch. "Sleep," Rebecca told him gently. "I'll wake you if I need help." He hesitated, then curled up beside his sister, one arm protectively draped across her. Rebecca tucked the blanket around them both, then turned her attention back to the flames. She would not sleep tonight. She couldn't risk the fire dying out. The moon rose above the pines, casting long shadows across the snow. An owl called in the distance, answered by another farther away. Rebecca fed another branch to the fire and pulled her shawl tighter, trying to ignore the hunger gnawing at her stomach. She would give the children what little food they had come morning. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond their small circle of light. Rebecca froze, her breath catching. Wildlife was plentiful in these mountains. Wolves, bears, mountain lions. Daniel had known how to handle such threats, but she had no weapon, no means of protection save for the fire itself. Another sound, closer this time, the unmistakable crunch of snow underfoot. Not an animal then, but a person. Rebecca reached for a burning branch, prepared to defend her children against whatever threat approached. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing in the moonlight. Rebecca's heart hammered in her chest as she raised the makeshift torch higher, illuminating the stranger's features. He was a native man, his bronze skin weathered by sun and wind, long black hair braided with small wooden beads. A fur-lined hide jacket hung to his knees, and a knife was strapped at his waist. In one hand he carried a bow, in the other a string of rabbits. Rebecca stepped between the stranger and her sleeping children. The burning branch extended. "Stay back," she warned, her voice surprisingly steady. The man made no move to approach. Instead, he slowly set down both his bow and the rabbits, then straightened, raising empty palms in a universal gesture of peace. "Cold night," he said, his English accented but clear. "Bad place for little ones." Rebecca didn't lower her branch. "We're just resting for the night. We'll be moving on at first light." The man looked past her to where Thomas and Sophia slept, then back to the meager fire. His expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his dark eyes, perhaps understanding, perhaps pity. "Many miles to next town. Snow comes again before sunrise." He nodded toward the rabbits he'd placed on the ground. "Take. Children need food." Rebecca hesitated, suspicion warring with desperate need. In Pinewood Valley, relations with the native tribes were strained at best, hostile at worst. Stories circulated of raids on outlying farms, of travelers who ventured too far into tribal territories and never returned. But this man stood alone, offering food to strangers without asking anything in return. "Why would you help us?" she asked. The man was silent for a moment, his gaze moving from the fire to the darkened sky. "Stars watch everyone same. Cold. Kills all same." He gestured to the rabbits again. "Take." Slowly, Rebecca lowered the burning branch. Thomas stirred at her feet, roused by their voices. He sat up quickly, eyes widening at the sight of the stranger. "Mama?" His hand went instinctively to the pocket watch. "It's all right," she said, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. "This man has brought us food." Thomas looked from his mother to the stranger with open curiosity. Unlike most children in the settlement, he had never shown fear of the native people they occasionally saw trading at the general store. The man nodded to Thomas. Strong boy, like fire spirit. He pointed to Thomas's red hair, so like Daniel's had been. To Rebecca's surprise, Thomas stood and approached the stranger, stopping just beyond arm's reach. "Are you Cheyenne?" he asked. "My pa said the Cheyenne know these mountains better than anybody." A faint smile touched the man's lips. "Yes, Cheyenne, called Marka. I'm Thomas. That's my mama, Rebecca, and my sister, Sophia." He hesitated, then added with a child's directness, "Our pa died. His sister made us leave our house." Rebecca opened her mouth to hush him, but Marka spoke first. Family should protect family. His voice carried no judgment, merely stating what he believed to be true. "Yes, they should," Rebecca agreed quietly, the bitter disappointment of Martha's betrayal still fresh. Marka retrieved the rabbits and approached the fire, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. He crouched beside it, pulled a small knife from his belt, and began skinning the first rabbit with practiced efficiency. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You have no place to go?" he asked without looking up from his work. Rebecca hesitated before answering. Admitting their vulnerability to a stranger seemed unwise, but lying served no purpose. "There's a town west of here, Cedar Ridge. I thought perhaps they might need a teacher." Marka glanced up. "Cedar Ridge not safe. Men there hunt my people for bounty." He returned to his task, adding, "There is shelter. 3 hours walk, my winter camp." Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. "You're offering to take us to your camp? Snow comes heavy tonight. Little girl already cold sick." He nodded toward Sophia, who had awakened and was watching him with wide, solemn eyes. "Need real shelter, fire, medicine." The offer was both tempting and terrifying. To place her trust and her children's lives in the hands of this stranger went against everything the settlers at Pinewood Valley would consider sensible. And yet, what choice did she have? Their current situation was untenable. They would not survive more than a day or two without proper shelter and food. As if reading her thoughts, Marka said, "Decision must be quick. Storm waits for no one." Rebecca looked at Thomas, who nodded eagerly, and then at Sophia, whose blue-tinged lips and glassy eyes spoke of incipient hypothermia. She thought of Martha Prescott's cold dismissal, of the community that had turned its back on a widow and her fatherless children, and made her choice. "We'll come with you," she said, "if you give me your word that no harm will come to us." Marka held her gaze steadily. "Marka's word is bond. No harm comes to women and children under my protection." He returned to preparing the rabbits, spearing pieces of meat on green sticks to roast over the fire. The smell of cooking meat filled the air, making Rebecca's stomach clench painfully. It had been days since they'd had a proper meal, Martha, having forgotten to feed them the day before their expulsion. Marka handed the first cooked portions to the children. Thomas accepted eagerly, while Sophia hesitated until Rebecca nodded encouragement. Only after both children had been served did he offer meat to Rebecca, then take some for himself. They ate in silence, the crackling of the fire and the distant call of night creatures the only sounds. Rebecca watched Marka surreptitiously, trying to reconcile this man's quiet generosity with the fearsome tales she'd heard all her life. He moved with a natural grace and confidence, every motion purposeful. There was nothing threatening in his demeanor, yet she sensed a latent strength, a readiness that spoke of a life where vigilance meant survival. When they had finished eating, Marka rose and extinguished the fire with snow. "Must move now. Storm comes." He shouldered his bow and gestured for them to follow. Rebecca hesitated. "In the dark? Moon still bright. Path easier to find without snow covering tracks." He pointed to the clouds gathering on the horizon. Dawn brings blizzard. Rebecca gathered their few possessions, while Thomas helped Sophia to her feet. The little girl swayed slightly, her exhaustion evident in every line of her small body. Without a word, Marka approached and crouched before her. "Little dove tired," he said gently. "Marka carry?" Sophia regarded him solemnly for a long moment, then, to Rebecca's astonishment, raised her arms in silent acceptance. Marka lifted her easily, settling her against his shoulder, where she immediately rested her head against the fur lining of his jacket. They set off through the moonlit forest, Marka leading, Rebecca and Thomas following close behind. The Cheyenne warrior moved with the certainty of one who knew every tree and stone of the land, choosing paths that were relatively clear of deep snow. Even with Sophia in his arms, he moved more swiftly and surely than Rebecca could have managed. Alone, Thomas stayed close to Rebecca's side, occasionally reaching for her hand when the terrain grew difficult. The cold bit through her thin boots, her toes long since numb. Her breath came in painful gasps, the frigid air searing her lungs. But she pressed on, focusing on Marka's broad back ahead of her, on the sight of Sophia's small form, cradled safely. In his arms, they traversed forests and climbed modest ridges, descended into sheltered valleys, and crossed a narrow, partially frozen stream where Marka tested each step before allowing them to follow. The moon tracked its course across the sky, occasionally disappearing behind gathering clouds. After what seemed an eternity, Marka slowed his pace, then stopped atop a small rise. "Almost there," he said, nodding toward a shadowed valley below. "My winter camp." Rebecca squinted into the darkness, making out the faint outline of a structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. Smoke rose from a small opening at the top, dissipating in the night air. "You live alone?" she asked, surprised. She had expected a tribal encampment, not a solitary dwelling. Marka's expression revealed nothing. "My choice, for now." He adjusted Sophia, who had fallen asleep in his arms, and continued forward. The dwelling, Rebecca discovered as they drew closer, was a small but sturdy lodge constructed of timber, hides, and earth. Built against the natural shelter of a cliff face, it was nearly invisible until they were upon it. A few yards away stood a smaller structure that appeared to be a storage shed of some kind. Marka ducked through the low entrance, still carrying Sophia. Rebecca and Thomas followed, blinking as their eyes adjusted to the dim light within. A central fire pit provided both warmth and illumination, the smoke rising to vent through an opening in the center of the roof. Furs lined the walls and floor, creating insulation against the cold. Supplies, herbs, dried foods, tools, weapons were organized neatly around the perimeter. The contrast between the bitter cold outside and the shelter's warmth was immediate and overwhelming. Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes, whether from relief or the smoke or simple exhaustion, she couldn't tell. Marka laid Sophia gently on a pallet of thick furs near the fire, then moved to add more wood to the flames. The sudden increase in light revealed details Rebecca hadn't initially noticed. A small wooden table in one corner, holding various carved items, bundles of herbs hanging from the rafters, a stack of books beside what appeared to be Marka's sleeping area. Books in a Cheyenne warrior's dwelling. Rebecca couldn't hide her surprise. Marka noticed her gaze and said simply, "Knowledge has no tribe." He moved to a wooden chest, removed several additional furs, and brought them to Rebecca. "Rest safe here." Thomas had already sunk down beside his sister, the warmth and relative security overcoming his usual vigilance. Rebecca arranged the furs over both children, allowing herself a moment to stroke Sophia's pale cheek, relieved to find it warmer than before. "Thank you," she said, turning to Marka. The words seemed wholly inadequate for what he had done, saving them from almost certain death, but they were all she had to offer. Marka acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod, then moved to heat water in a small iron pot suspended over the fire. Into this, he crumbled dried leaves from one of the hanging bundles. "For the little one," he explained, "medicine for cold sickness." Rebecca recognized some of the herbs. Her grandmother had been known for her remedies and had taught Rebecca the basics of herbal healing before she died. "Willow bark and elderberry?" Maka looked up, something like approval, in his dark eyes. "Yes, and others. You know plant medicine?" "A little. My grandmother was a healer of sorts." Rebecca watched as he added honey to the mixture. The settlers called her a witch, but they came to her when the doctor couldn't help. Wisdom often feared by those who don't understand. Maka stirred the concoction, then set it aside to steep, like fear of different skin, different ways. Rebecca felt a flush of shame, knowing how she had initially reacted to his appearance. How many times had she heard neighbors in Pinewood Valley speak of savages and heathens, never questioning the dehumanizing language? "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for judging you before I knew you." Maka regarded her steadily. "All people judge what they don't know. Question is, do they learn when shown truth?" His words lingered in the air between them, challenging and profound. Rebecca found herself speechless, confronted by her own prejudices. Maka seemed to sense her discomfort and changed the subject. "How long since husband walked to spirit world?" 3 months, Rebecca answered, the grief still raw. "It happened quickly. He was injured logging, then took ill with pneumonia. Quick death sometimes harder for those left behind. No time to prepare heart." Maka checked the herbal tea, found it ready, and poured some into a small clay cup. "Better to wake little one? Medicine works best warm." Rebecca gently roused Sophia, who opened her eyes reluctantly. "Sweetheart, this medicine will help you feel better. Can you drink it for Mama?" The girl looked from the cup to Maka, then back to her mother, uncertainty in her expression. "It's sweet," Rebecca encouraged, taking a small sip herself to demonstrate. "See, like honey tea." Sophia accepted the cup with both hands, taking careful sips under her mother's watchful eye. When she had finished, Rebecca laid her back down, tucking the furs around her once more. The child's eyes were already drooping, exhaustion claiming her again. Thomas had fallen into a deep sleep. His features relaxed for the first time in months. Rebecca touched his red hair gently, overwhelmed by love and fear for her children and what the future might hold. "Sleep now," Maka said, offering her another fur. "Morning comes soon enough." Rebecca wanted to protest that she couldn't impose, further that she should take watch or help somehow, but her body betrayed her. The warmth, the relative safety, the relief of having survived the day, all conspired to drag her towards sleep. She settled beside her children, pulling the fur over herself, and surrendered to exhaustion. She woke sometime later, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. The fire had burned low, casting the lodge in dim golden light. Her children slept peacefully beside her, Sophia's breathing easier than it had been earlier. Across the fire pit, Maka sat cross-legged, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. Whether he was sleeping or in some form of meditation, Rebecca couldn't tell. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the sound of heavy snowfall. The storm he had predicted had arrived, and they were safe from its fury, thanks to this man who owed them nothing. As she drifted back to sleep, Rebecca realized that for the first time since Daniel's death, she felt something besides grief and fear, a tentative, fragile hope. Morning arrived as a subtle lightening of the gloom within the lodge. Rebecca woke fully to find Maka already active, stoking the fire and preparing a simple meal of cornmeal porridge sweetened with dried berries. Thomas was helping him, handing items as requested, watching the Cheyenne's every move with rapt attention. Sophia still slept, her color much improved. the blue tinge gone from her lips. Rebecca pressed a hand to her forehead, relieved to find no fever. Medicine worked, Marka observed, bringing Rebecca a wooden bowl of porridge. Little dove, stronger today. Rebecca accepted the food gratefully. Yes, thank you, for everything. Thomas joined them, already working on his own portion. Marka was teaching me Cheyenne words, Mama, and he says he'll show me how to make a bow like his, only smaller. Rebecca glanced at Marka, who gave a slight shrug. Boy needs to learn, world not always kind to those who cannot protect themselves. The truth of this statement, demonstrated so vividly by their own circumstances, silenced any objection Rebecca might have made. Instead, she asked, "How long do you think the storm will last?" Marka moved to the entrance of the lodge, pulling aside the hide covering to reveal a world transformed by snow. Drifts had piled nearly to the height of Rebecca's waist, obscuring the landscape in every direction. 3 days, maybe 4, he said, letting the covering fall back into place. Path to Cedar Ridge closed until snow hardens enough to walk. On top, Rebecca's heart sank. 3 or 4 days trapped by weather, dependent on a stranger's charity. We've imposed enough already. Surely there's somewhere closer. Nowhere close is safe, Marka interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. White settlers in mountain valleys shoot Cheyenne on sight. Other tribes know better with white women and children. What about your people, your family? Rebecca asked. Wouldn't they help us? A shadow passed over Marka's features. My family walks in spirit world now. Disease brought by traders took many 2 winters ago. He stirred the fire with more force than necessary. Those who survived moved south with southern Cheyenne bands. But you stayed, Thomas said, his young face serious. Marka nodded. This land knows Marka. Marka knows this land. He glanced at Rebecca. When path clears, I take you to safe place, trading post run by Frenchmen 30 miles east. He fair to all people. 30 miles? Rebecca couldn't hide her dismay. Such a journey would be difficult even in good weather nearly. Impossible in deep snow with 2 young children. No choice, Marka said bluntly. Cedar Ridge not safe for you, not with children. He hesitated, then added, Man who runs trading post, Baptiste. He sometimes needs help. Can read, write. I was a teacher, Rebecca said, a touch of pride entering her voice. Literature, mathematics, history. Marka nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Baptiste has sons, no schooling, might trade work for lessons. Hope flickered in Rebecca's chest. A trading post would have supplies, shelter, possibly work, a place to start rebuilding their lives. You'd take us all that way? Why? Marka was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Finally he said, Many moons ago, White Trapper found Marka, just boy then, lost in blizzard, took to his cabin, saved life. He touched a small wooden amulet hanging at his neck. Man had no reason to help Cheyenne boy, did anyway. Now Marka helps when he can. The simplicity of his explanation humbled Rebecca. No grand declarations of heroism or virtue, just a quiet acknowledgement of humanity's capacity for kindness, passed from one generation to the next. A soft sound drew their attention. Sophia had awakened and was sitting up among the firs, her wide eyes taking in her surroundings with evident confusion. It's all right, sweetheart, Rebecca said, moving to her daughter's side. We're safe. Here, this is Marka. He helped us when we were cold last night, remember? Sophia regarded the Cheyenne warrior solemnly, then, to Rebecca's astonishment, pointed to the amulet at his neck with clear interest. Marka smiled, the first full smile Rebecca had seen from him, and removed the carved wooden pendant, offering it for Sophia's inspection. Fox spirit, he explained, clever and brave, survives when others cannot. Sophia took the amulet carefully, tracing the carved design with her small fingers. A look of intense concentration crossed her face, and then, in a voice rusty from disuse, she whispered, "Pretty." Rebecca gasped, tears springing instantly to her eyes. Thomas rushed to his sister's side, his own expression one of wonder. "Sophia, you talked!" The little girl looked as surprised as they were, her hand flying to her throat as if to confirm the sound had indeed come from her. Maka watched quietly, a knowing look in his eyes. "Spirit returns when heart feels safe," he said simply. Rebecca couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the moment. Her daughter, silent since Daniel's death, had found her voice again in this most unlikely of places. She met Maka's gaze over Sophia's head, trying to convey her gratitude without words. He nodded, once in understanding, then rose and moved toward the storage area, giving the family privacy for their small miracle. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but within the lodge, Rebecca felt the first true warmth she had known in months. They were stranded, yes, homeless, grieving their future uncertain, but they were together. They were alive, and for now, they were safe. And that, she realized as she held her children close, was more than enough to begin again. The blizzard howled outside Maka's lodge for 3 days, imprisoning them within its wooden walls. By the third morning, Rebecca found herself watching the entrance with increasing anxiety, the small space growing more confining with each passing hour. Thomas had adapted quickly, following Maka like a shadow, absorbing everything the Cheyenne warrior was willing to teach, from basic words in his language to how to clean and prepare small game for cooking. Sophia, having broken her silence, now spoke in quiet, hesitant sentences, mostly to her brother and Maka, though she still clung to Rebecca when uncertain. The sudden return of her daughter's voice felt like a miracle Rebecca hardly deserved, one she feared might vanish as suddenly as it had appeared. She watched Sophia now, sitting cross-legged beside Maka as he showed her how to weave thin strips of bark into a small basket. The girl's tongue poked between her teeth in concentration, her small fingers mimicking his larger ones with painstaking care. "Like this?" Sophia asked, her voice still rough from disuse. Maka nodded, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Yes, little dove learns quickly." Rebecca turned away, blinking back tears. Such a simple exchange, yet it pierced her heart. For months after Daniel's death, she had begged, pleaded, even shouted at Sophia to speak, desperate to hear her daughter's voice again. Nothing had worked. Yet here, in the most unlikely of places, the child had found her voice once more. "The storm is letting up." Rebecca turned to find Maka watching her, his dark eyes observant but unreadable as always. She hadn't heard him approach, a disconcerting habit of his that she was still getting used to. "Will we be able to travel soon?" she asked, moving toward the lodge entrance. Maka joined her, pulling aside the hide covering. The world outside was transformed, pristine white drifts sculpted by wind into fantastic shapes, their surfaces glittering in the midday sun. The sky above was a clear, hard blue, with no hint of the clouds that had dumped so much snow upon them. "Tomorrow," he said. "Snow must settle, still too soft for walking today." Rebecca nodded, trying to mask her impatience. 4 days they had already imposed on his hospitality, eating his food, using his supplies. Thomas had taken to following him around, asking endless questions which Maka answered with remarkable patience. Sophia had attached herself to him as well, in her quiet way. Only Rebecca maintained a careful distance, conscious always that they were strangers, that his kindness, however genuine it seemed, remained mysterious in its origin. "You're worried," Maka observed, letting the hide fall back into place. Rebecca smoothed her skirt, buying time. It's a long journey to the trading post you mentioned, with 2 children in deep snow. Path will be hard, he agreed, but we go slow. Rest when needed. She glanced at her children, at Thomas showing Sophia how to carve a simple stick figure with the small knife Maka had given him. What if we encounter others, settlers who might not understand why we're traveling with a Cheyenne? Maka's expression hardened slightly. We avoid others, travel ridgelines, stay in trees. He paused, studying her. Unless you fear Maka more than cold. The directness of his question caught her off guard. No, she said quickly, genuinely. You've saved our lives. People can be cruel when they don't understand what they're seeing. This Maka knows well. He turned away, moving to check the smoked venison hanging from the rafters. We leave at first light. Need good start. Rebecca watched him, guilt and gratitude mingling uncomfortably in her chest. Despite her attempts to maintain emotional distance, she had found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. The graceful economy of his movements, the gentle way he spoke to Sophia, the patience with which he answered Thomas's endless questions. In the firelight, his features were striking, all planes and angles softened by the warm glow. Sometimes, when their eyes met across the small space, she felt a jolt of something. That made her look away quickly. Daniel had been gone only 3 months. The wound of his loss was still raw, still bleeding. What kind of widow was she to notice another man's features, to feel anything but grief? "Mama, look!" Thomas called, breaking into her thoughts. He held up a small wooden figure, crude but recognizable as a bear. "Maka showed me how to find the animal inside the wood." Rebecca crossed to him, forcing a smile. "It's wonderful, Thomas. You've done well. Can I make one for Sophia? She wants a rabbit." "If Maka doesn't mind sparing the wood," Rebecca said, glancing at their host. Maka nodded, already selecting a suitable piece from his stores. Wood gives itself to become new things. Good way to learn patience. The remainder of the day passed in preparations for their journey. Maka packed dried meat, some corn cakes, and various herbs and medicines into a hide satchel. He repaired a tear in Thomas's coat and fashioned crude but effective snowshoes. For all of them, from flexible branches and strips of hide. "Won't slow us too much," he explained as he demonstrated how to walk in them. "Keep from sinking in deep snow." By evening, Rebecca felt the weight of anticipation pressing down on her. Tomorrow they would leave this small sanctuary, venturing into a wilderness she barely understood, toward a future she couldn't predict. The prospect was terrifying, yet staying wasn't an option. This wasn't their home, and Maka, for all his kindness, wasn't family. Thomas and Sophia fell asleep quickly that night, exhausted from the day's activities. Rebecca sat by the fire, unable to rest, her mind racing with fears and contingencies. What if the trading post owner wouldn't help them? What if the journey proved too difficult? What if Sophia stopped speaking again? "Worry steals sleep," Maka said, settling across from her. "Steals strength needed for tomorrow." Rebecca sighed. "I can't help it. Everything is so uncertain." "Life always uncertain," he replied, feeding small sticks into the fire. "Only fools think otherwise." There was wisdom in his words, but it brought little comfort. "Before Daniel died, I thought I knew what my life would be. A home, children, growing old together." She traced patterns in the dirt floor with her finger. "Now I don't know if we'll survive the month." Maka was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the flames. When Maka's village died of the sickness, thought world ended, no family, no tribe, no purpose. He touched the fox amulet at his neck, but sun still rose, wind still blew, life continued. "How did you bear it?" she asked softly. "One day, then next day, then next." He lifted his gaze to meet hers. Find small reasons to continue. Sunrise, eagle's flight, child's smile. He nodded toward Thomas and Sophia. You have better reasons than most. Rebecca followed his gaze to her sleeping children, their faces peaceful in slumber. Yes, she acknowledged, I do. They fell into silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, an owl called into the night. Rebecca felt her eyelids growing heavy, the tension of the day finally catching up with her. As she drifted toward sleep, she thought she heard Maka speaking softly in his own language, words she couldn't understand, but which sounded like a prayer or blessing. Dawn arrived with a crystalline clarity, the air so cold it hurt to breathe. Rebecca woke to find Maka already active, packing the last of their supplies and extinguishing the fire. Thomas helped eagerly, while Sophia stood watching, wrapped in a fur Maka had cut down to her size. Must move quickly, Maka said when he noticed Rebecca was awake. Many miles before nightfall. Rebecca nodded, rising stiffly. The days of relative inactivity had dulled the edge of her exhaustion, but her body still ached from the ordeal that had brought them to Maka's lodge. She helped the children prepare, making sure Thomas had secured his father's pocket watch safely and that Sophia's boots were tightly laced. Leaving the warmth of the lodge for the bitter cold outside was like a physical blow. Rebecca gasped as the frigid air filled her lungs, momentarily robbing her of breath. Beside her, Sophia whimpered, burying her face in Rebecca's skirts. Maka appeared unaffected, his breath creating a cloud of steam in the morning air. He shouldered his bow and the pack containing their supplies, then helped Thomas secure his snowshoes. Rebecca struggled with her own, her fingers clumsy with cold, until Maka wordlessly knelt before her and completed the task himself. Thank you, she murmured, acutely aware of his proximity. He nodded once, then turned to lift Sophia, settling her on his back where she could cling to his shoulders. Little dove ride first part, learn snowshoes later. The journey began in silence, each of them focused on negotiating the difficult terrain. The snow was deep, but had developed a thin crust overnight, that their snowshoes mostly kept them from breaking through. Maka led, creating a path for Rebecca and Thomas to follow. He set a deliberately slow pace, mindful of their lesser stamina and experience. The landscape was eerily beautiful, pristine white, broken only by stands of pine and bare deciduous trees, whose branches were coated in ice that sparkled in the morning sun. In other circumstances, Rebecca might have found it breathtaking. Now she saw only the obstacles and dangers, deep drifts that could swallow a child, icy patches where a fall could mean a broken bone, the vast emptiness that seemed to stretch endlessly before them. They had been traveling for perhaps 2 hours when Maka suddenly halted, raising one hand in a silent command to stop. Rebecca froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Thomas bumped into her from behind, nearly losing his balance. "What is it?" she whispered. Maka didn't answer, his head cocked, as if listening for something beyond her hearing. He gently lowered Sophia to the ground, then unslung his bow, notching an arrow with fluid grace. "Stay," he instructed, moving forward silently. Rebecca pulled both children close, her eyes scanning the surrounding forest for whatever threat Maka had sensed. For several minutes, nothing moved except the occasional shower of snow falling from a branch. Then, a crashing sound from their right, followed by men's voices, loud, rough, unconcerned with who might hear them. "Told. I saw smoke from that ridge," one voice said. "Injun camp, bet my last dollar on it." "Better be," another replied. "Wasted 3 days tracking in this damn snow." Rebecca's blood ran cold. Bounty hunters. Maka had warned her that some men from Cedar Ridge hunted natives for the price on their scalps. She pulled the children behind a large pine, pressing a finger to her lips in a desperate plea for silence. Sophia's eyes were wide with fear, but she remained quiet. Thomas looked not afraid but angry, his small hands balled into fists at his sides. Rebecca prayed Maka had gone far enough away to avoid the men, that he would circle back for them when it was safe. The voices grew louder, closer. "Tracks here," the first voice called. "Snowshoes, heading east. Fresh. Can't tell. Snow's been funny since that storm." Rebecca held her breath, her arms tightening around her children. If the men followed the tracks, they would eventually find them. If they had dogs, it would be even sooner. She considered their options. They couldn't outrun the men, not with the children. They couldn't hide indefinitely in the open forest. Her only hope was that the bounty hunters would follow Maka's tracks in the wrong direction, giving them time to escape. A branch snapped directly behind them. Rebecca stifled a gasp, turning slowly to find Maka crouched there, a finger to his lips. Relief flooded through her. He gestured for them to follow him, moving in a direction perpendicular to their original path. "Bad men," Sophia whispered, as Maka lifted her again. "Yes," he replied softly, "but not smart men. Come." They moved as quietly as possible, Maka, choosing their path with obvious care to minimize the tracks they left. Rebecca could still hear the bounty hunters' voices, but they seemed to be moving away rather than toward them. After about 20 minutes of tense travel, Maka led them into a dense thicket of young pines where they could rest, hidden from view. "They follow old tracks to my lodge," he explained. "Find it empty. Waste more time searching there." "What, if they follow our new tracks?" Thomas asked. "Covered as best could," Maka said, "and snow begins again soon." He nodded toward the sky, where clouds were once more gathering. "We'll hide trail completely." Rebecca hadn't noticed the changing weather, too focused on the immediate threat. Now she saw that the earlier clear blue had given way to a pearlescent gray. The temperature, too, was rising slightly. She could feel the difference in the air. "How did you know they were coming?" she asked. "Birds warned." Maka pointed to a flock of ravens circling above the area they had fled. "Always watch birds. They see danger first." They rested only briefly before continuing, Maka now setting a faster pace despite the more difficult terrain. They were moving uphill, away from the easier valleys, choosing a path along rocky ridgelines where the snow was shallower and tracks less obvious. The going was harder, especially for Thomas, whose shorter legs struggled with the steeper inclines. By midday, snowflakes had begun to fall again, gently at first, then with increasing intensity. The wind picked up, driving the snow horizontally at times. Rebecca pulled her shawl tighter, grateful for the additional furs Maka had provided, but still chilled to the bone. Thomas trudged beside her, uncharacteristically quiet, his face set in grim determination. "And need shelter soon," Maka announced, surveying the darkening sky. "Storm coming fast." Rebecca's heart sank. They had lost precious hours evading the bounty hunters, and now another storm threatened to further delay their journey. But she knew better than to argue with the weather. "Where can we shelter?" Maka pointed toward a more densely forested area ahead, and slightly below their current position. "Old Bear Cave there, used before in winter. Safe." The descent was treacherous, the slope steep and increasingly slick as the snow accumulated. Rebecca slipped twice, saved from falling only by Maka's quick reflexes. Thomas managed better, his lower center of gravity an advantage on the downhill. Sophia remained secured to Maka's back, her small face buried against his shoulder to shield it from the driving snow. The cave, when they reached it, was little more than a deep overhang in the rock face, but it was dry and out of the wind. Maka quickly established that no animals had claimed it in his absence, then set about gathering wood for a fire. The Children huddled together at the back of the cave, while Rebecca helped collect dried pine needles and bark for tinder. "Will the bad men find us here?" Thomas asked as Marka worked to start a fire. "No," Marka said confidently. "Storm covers tracks, cave hidden from below. Safe now." The fire caught, small flames licking at the carefully arranged kindling. Rebecca moved closer, extending her hands toward the warmth. Her fingers were numb, her toes painful with cold. Sophia and Thomas pressed against her sides, seeking both comfort and warmth. Marka produced dried venison from his pack, passing pieces to each of them. "Eat. Need strength." The meat was tough but flavorful, requiring extended chewing that at least gave the illusion of a more substantial meal. Rebecca tried to eat slowly, knowing they needed to conserve their supplies. The storm might trap them here for another day, or more. "How much farther to the trading post?" she asked. 2 days, Marka replied, "maybe 3 with snow." Rebecca nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Every delay increased the risk of encountering more people like the bounty hunters. Every extra day on the trail depleted their limited resources. "Will the man there, Baptiste, truly help us?" she pressed. Marka's gaze was steady. "Baptiste Fairman treats all people same. Wife died many years ago, raises sons alone, understands hard times." It wasn't quite the reassurance Rebecca had hoped for, but it was realistic. And Marka had not, she realized, given her false comfort at any point in their acquaintance. He had been straightforward about dangers and difficulties, honest about what lay ahead. As the day waned, the storm intensified. Wind howled at the cave entrance, driving snow into drifts that began to encroach upon their shelter. Marka built up the fire and hung one of the furs across the narrowest part of the opening, creating a barrier that kept out the worst of the draft. Sophia fell asleep first, curled against Rebecca's side like a small woodland creature in its den. Thomas resisted longer, his eyes heavy, but his mind active. "Marka," he said, his voice slurred with exhaustion. "Were those men really hunting people?" The Cheyenne warrior's expression darkened. "Yes, some men hunt animals for food, for survival. Others hunt people for money, for hate. Because they're different. Like you, yes, different skin, different ways." Marka added another branch to the fire. "Fear makes men cruel." Thomas considered this, his young face solemn in the firelight. "I'm not afraid of you." A small smile touched Marka's lips. "No, you see with clear eyes, not yet clouded by what others say to believe." "Pa said that too," Thomas murmured, his eyelids drooping. "Said to always look with my own eyes, not borrow other people's sight." His words trailed. Offa's sleep finally claimed him. Rebecca stroked her son's hair, her heart aching with pride and loss. Daniel had been a good man, a fair man. He hadn't shared the prejudices of many in their settlement. It was one of the things she had loved most about him. "Your husband was wise," Marka said quietly. "Yes," Rebecca agreed. "He was." She hesitated, then added, "He would be grateful to you for helping us." Marka acknowledged this with a slight nod, his gaze returning to the fire. The flames cast his features in sharp relief, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the high cheekbones that spoke of his heritage. Rebecca found herself studying him openly for the first time, noting the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the few strands of silver in his otherwise black hair, the calm steadiness of his hands as he tended the fire. "You should rest," he said without looking up. "Tomorrow will be a hard journey." Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks, embarrassed to be caught staring. "What about you? You need rest too. Later, must keep watch first, make sure fire stays strong." She wanted to protest, to insist that she could take the first watch, but exhaustion was already pulling at her, making her eyelids heavy. "Wake," Me in a few hours, she managed. I'll take a turn. Maka made a non-committal sound that might have been agreement or dismissal. Rebecca was too tired to press the issue. She curled around her children, drawing the fur blanket over all three of them, and surrendered to sleep. Dreams came, fragmented and unsettling. Daniel standing in their doorway, his face troubled as he tried to tell her something she couldn't hear. Martha Prescott's cold smile as she locked the door against them. The bounty hunters' voices closer and closer. Through it all, a sense of being pursued, of dangers closing in from all sides. Rebecca woke with a start, her heart pounding. The cave was dark, save for the glow of the banked fire. Maka was still awake, his silhouette outlined against the faint light. He turned at her movement, his expression questioning. "Bad dreams," she explained softly, careful not to wake the children. "Memory wolves," he said with understanding. "Chase in dark." The poetic accuracy of his description startled a small laugh from her. Yes, exactly that. Maka added wood to the fire, coaxing the flames back to life. Outside, the storm continued unabated, wind moaning through the trees like a living thing. "You didn't wake me," Rebecca observed, noting the position of the moon visible through gaps in the clouds. Several hours had passed. "Needed rest more than Maka," he said simply. She moved carefully away from the children, who slept on undisturbed, and joined him by the fire. "That wasn't our agreement." "Not agreement. Your words before sleep took you." A hint of amusement colored his tone. "Besides, used to night watch. Lived alone, long time." Rebecca pulled her knees to her chest, watching the flames dance. "Why do you live alone, away from your people?" Maka was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual, tinged with something she hadn't heard before, a vulnerability perhaps. "After sickness took village, joined other band for time, but memories too strong. Faces of dead in dreams. Children's. Laughter in wind." He gestured around them. "Here in mountains, closer to sky, closer to spirits, easier to breathe." "You've been alone since then?" "How long?" 3 winters. Rebecca tried to imagine such solitude, such isolation. Even in her grief, she had had her children, neighbors, until Martha's betrayal, the familiar rhythms of settlement life. Maka had chosen total separation, living with only his memories for company. Doesn't it get? She searched for the right word. Lonely. Maka's eyes met hers across the fire, something deep and unreadable in their dark depths. Alone, not same as lonely. Can be surrounded by people, still feel alone. The truth of his statement resonated painfully. How many times had she felt utterly alone in the months since Daniel's death, despite being surrounded by the settlement? How many sleepless nights had she lain awake, aching with isolation, even with her children sleeping beside her? "Yes," she whispered. "I understand that." A log in the fire collapsed, sending up a shower of sparks. In the momentary flare of light, Rebecca saw something change in Maka's expression. A softening, a recognition of shared experience that transcended the vast differences in their lives and backgrounds. "Your path will find people again," he said. "Children need others, need to grow among voices, laughter." "And you? Will your path find people again?" He looked away, back toward the storm raging outside. "Path not clear yet. For now, mountains are enough." Rebecca sensed there was more he wasn't saying, but she didn't press. Everyone had the right to their own pain, their own healing. Maka had respected her grief. She would respect his solitude. They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned low. The wind outside began to diminish, the snowfall lightening. Through breaks in the clouds, stars appeared, cold and distant in the vast blackness of the sky. Storm passes, Maka observed. Can travel again when sun rises? Rebecca nodded, relieved. Thank you for everything. I don't know how we would have survived without you. Maka seemed uncomfortable with her gratitude. Would do same for any lost in storm. Would you? She challenged gently. Any white settlers, even knowing how some of them hunt your people? He considered this, his expression thoughtful. Children, yes, always help children. He met her gaze directly. Others? Depends. Some whites hate without knowing, others know but don't hate. Must judge each heart as it reveals itself. The wisdom in his words humbled her. How many times had she heard blanket statements about savages and heathens from the settlers in Pinewood Valley? How often had she remained silent, neither agreeing nor challenging such views? Yet here was Maka, judging individuals by their actions rather than their origins, despite having far more reason for hatred than most. I hope, she said softly, that my heart has revealed itself well to you. Something flickered in his eyes, warmth perhaps, or approval. Heart shows. In care for children, in courage on hard path. In respect for ways not your own. He nodded once, definitively. Good heart. The simple affirmation touched Rebecca deeply. From this man of few words, such a statement felt like high praise indeed. She found herself smiling, the expression stiff from disuse. Thank you. Maka gestured toward where Thomas and Sophia slept. Rest now, few hours until dawn. Rebecca knew she should return to her children, should try to reclaim some sleep before the difficult journey ahead. Instead, she remained by the fire, drawn by the rare moment of connection with this enigmatic man who had saved them. Tell me about your people, she said impulsively. The Cheyenne. I know so little, and what I've heard from settlers is... She trailed off, embarrassed. Not truth, Maka finished for her, or small truth twisted. Yes. He seemed to consider her request, weighing something in his mind. Then slowly he began to speak, his voice taking on a different cadence, almost musical in its rhythm. He told her of the Cheyenne ways, their reverence for the natural world, their belief in the connectedness of all living things, their ceremonies and traditions. He spoke of the sacred arrows and the sacred buffalo hat, of the Council of 44, of how children were raised by the entire community. Rebecca listened, entranced. His words painted pictures in her mind of a life so different from her own, yet founded on the same basic human needs, for family, for meaning, for connection to something larger than oneself. Your people have a rich heritage, she said when he finally fell silent. I wish more settlers would listen, would try to understand instead of fear. Understanding requires effort, Maka replied. Fear is easy. The truth of that statement hung between them as the night gradually gave way to dawn. The storm had passed, leaving a transformed world behind. Trees laden with snow, drifts sculpted into fantastic shapes, the rising sun casting a rosy glow over the pristine landscape. As Rebecca moved to wake her children, preparing for another day's journey, she found herself thinking of Maka's words about paths and people. Her own path had seemed so clear once: marriage, children, growing old in the settlement where she and Daniel had made their home. Now it stretched before her, unmarked and uncertain, into a future she couldn't envision. But for the first time since Martha Prescott had slammed the door behind them, that uncertainty didn't feel like drowning. It felt, strangely, like possibility. The day's journey proved challenging, but less harrowing than Rebecca had feared. The new snow was deep but powdery, easier to traverse with their snowshoes than the crusty layers beneath. Makar led them through valleys and around ridges, always alert, always choosing paths that offered concealment and protection. By midday, Thomas was flagging, his initial enthusiasm worn down by the constant effort of high-stepping through snow. Sophia, too, was struggling, though she made no complaint as she trudged beside her mother. Makar called a halt in a sheltered grove of pines, distributing more of their dwindling food supply. "Eat slow," he advised. "Makes feel more full." Rebecca nodded, breaking her portion of dried meat into tiny pieces, forcing herself to chew, each one thoroughly before swallowing. The children copied her example, though Thomas looked longingly at the remainder in Makar's pack. "How much farther today?" Rebecca asked. Makar surveyed their surroundings, his expression contemplative. "Can reach river by nightfall, good camp there." He hesitated, then added, "After river, one more day to trading post." Hope surged in Rebecca's chest. One more night in the wilderness, then civilization of a sort. The trading post might not be much, but it represented safety, shelter, the possibility of work, and a new beginning. "Hear that, children?" she said, injecting enthusiasm into her voice. "Just one more day after today, and we'll reach the trading post. Mr. Baptiste might have real bread, and maybe even honey." Sophia's eyes widened at the mention of honey, a rare treat even before they'd been cast out. Thomas looked less impressed, his gaze following Makar as the warrior moved to scout ahead. "Will Makar stay with us at the trading post?" he asked. Rebecca hesitated, uncertain how to answer. The question had been circling in her own mind, unacknowledged until now. Would Makar simply deliver them to Baptiste and return to his solitary existence in the mountains? The thought created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's for him to decide." Thomas frowned, kicking at the snow with the toe of his boot. "I want him to stay. He's teaching me important things, like Pa used to." Rebecca's throat tightened. Thomas had idolized Daniel, following him around the homestead from dawn until dusk, soaking up every scrap of knowledge his father had to offer. Daniel's death had left a void in the boy's life that Rebecca couldn't fill, no matter how hard she tried. Now he had transferred that desperate desire for male guidance to Makar. "Sweetie, Makar has his own life, his own path," she said gently. "We can't expect him to change that for us. We already owe him more than we can ever repay." "But he likes us," Thomas insisted. "I can tell. He smiles sometimes when he thinks we're not looking." Before Rebecca could respond, Makar returned, his expression serious. "Need to move, now." He began gathering their things with swift efficiency. Smoke to east, large camp, not Cheyenne, not Arapaho. Rebecca felt her heart sink. Who, then? Maybe trappers, maybe soldiers. His face was grim. Neither good for us. They resumed their journey at a faster pace, Makar now carrying Sophia to speed their progress. The terrain became more difficult as they ascended toward a ridgeline, the snow deeper in drifts that sometimes reached Rebecca's waist. She struggled to keep up, her breath coming in painful gasps, her legs burning with exertion. Thomas moved, with surprising agility, his smaller size an advantage in some ways. He stayed close to Makar, matching the warrior's footsteps as best he could. Rebecca forced herself to continue, one painful step after another, focusing on her children's safety rather than her own discomfort. By late afternoon, they had crossed the ridge and begun their descent toward the river Makar had mentioned. Rebecca could hear the water running beneath ice, a constant murmur that grew louder as they approached. The light was fading rapidly, the winter sun already sinking toward the western peaks. Mika led them to a spot where several large boulders created a natural windbreak beside the river. A crude lean-to of branches and hides was already in place, evidence that he had used this camp before. "Rest," he instructed, lowering Sophia to the ground. "Make fire. Maka check river crossing for tomorrow." Rebecca nodded, too exhausted for words. She gathered the children beneath the lean-to while Maka disappeared downstream. Thomas immediately began collecting kindling as he had been taught, while Sophia huddled against Rebecca, her small face pinched with cold and fatigue. "Just one more day," Rebecca murmured, stroking her daughter's hair. "One more day, and we'll be somewhere warm, with real walls and a roof." "And food?" Sophia asked hopefully. "Yes, and food." Rebecca tried to sound confident, though in truth, she had no idea what awaited them at Baptiste's trading post. If the Frenchman was charitable, they might find temporary shelter and work. If not, she forced the thought aside, unwilling to contemplate further rejection. By the time Maka returned, Thomas had built a small fire, and Rebecca had arranged their meager belongings in the shelter. The warrior nodded approval at their work, then added larger branches to the fire from a stockpile near the lean-to. "River, frozen enough to cross," he reported. "Need to go early before sun softens ice." Rebecca nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Another river crossing, another set of dangers. But they were almost there, almost to safety. If Baptiste proved to be as fair-minded as Maka believed, they ate the last of their provisions that night, a sparse meal that did little to satisfy their hunger. Tomorrow, they would either reach the trading post or... Rebecca refused to finish the thought. As darkness settled over the camp, the temperature dropped precipitously. The children huddled together beneath furs, while Rebecca and Maka sat by. The fire, neither speaking. The silence between them had become comfortable over the days of their journey, a shared space that required no words. Finally, as the moon rose over the eastern ridges, Rebecca voiced the question that had been troubling her since Thomas raised it earlier. "What will you do after you've brought us to the trading post?" Maka didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, measured. "Not decided. Winter's still long. Maybe stay near. Make sure Baptiste treats you fair." Rebecca felt a rush of relief that surprised her with its intensity. "We would welcome that," she said carefully. "The children, they've grown attached to you." Maka's expression remained unreadable in the firelight. "Children need stability, need place to grow roots." Rebecca nodded, looking toward where Thomas and Sophia slept. "Yes, they do, but they also need people who care for them, who teach them, who protect them." She met his gaze directly. "As you have done." Something flashed across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or uncertainty. Rebecca realized that despite his confidence in the wilderness, despite his quiet strength and self-sufficiency, there were aspects of life in which Maka was less assured. Connection, perhaps. Belonging. "Think on it," she said gently. "There's no need to decide tonight." He nodded once, then rose and moved to check the perimeter of their camp, effectively ending the conversation. Rebecca watched him go, a mixture of emotions churning within her. Relief that he might stay nearby, uncertainty about what that could mean, guilt at the very idea of wanting another man's presence when Daniel was so recently in his grave. Sleep came fitfully that night, broken by the sounds of nocturnal creatures and the constant murmur of the river. Rebecca dreamed of the Prescott homestead, of Martha's cold eyes as she ordered them to leave, of the door slamming with such finality. But in the dream, Rebecca wasn't alone on the doorstep. Maka stood beside her, a silent presence that somehow made the rejection bearable. She woke before dawn, disoriented by the dream and by the unfamiliar surroundings. The fire had burned low, but someone, Maka obviously, had kept it going through the night. He sat across from her, already awake, his expression distant as he gazed into the flames. "Bad dreams again?" he asked without looking up. Rebecca rubbed her eyes, still heavy with interrupted sleep. "How did you know?" "Talk in sleep. Call out names." Heat rose in her cheeks. What names had she called? Daniel's, Martha's, his? She was afraid to ask. "The children are still asleep," she observed, changing the subject. Maka nodded. "Let rest few more minutes. Long day ahead." Rebecca moved to sit beside him, drawn by the fire's warmth and by something less tangible, a desire for closeness, for connection in this quiet moment before the challenges of the day began. "Are you worried about the river crossing?" she asked. "Ice strong enough," he replied, "but always danger in crossing water in winter. Fall in, death comes quick." His bluntness was oddly reassuring. Maka never sugarcoated the truth, never offered false comfort. It was one of the qualities Rebecca had come to appreciate most about him. "We'll be careful," she promised. "Yes." He stirred the embers with a stick, coaxing more heat from the dying fire. Baptiste's trading post 2 hours beyond river. Reach by midday, if no trouble. 2 hours. Such a short distance after the long journey they had already made. Rebecca felt a surge of hope, tempered immediately by anxiety. What if Baptiste wouldn't help them? What if there was no place for them there? "What is he like, Baptiste?" Maka considered the question. "French father, Crow mother. Understands. Both worlds belongs to neither. Fair in trade. Harsh sometimes, but not cruel." He glanced at her. "Has 2 sons. Wild boys. Need teaching." The last part was clearly meant as reassurance, a reminder that she had skills to offer, value beyond simply being another mouth to feed. Rebecca appreciated the gesture, even as she wondered whether a frontier trader would truly value education for his sons. "How old are they?" "His sons. Younger boy, maybe 8 summers. Older one, 12, 13. Maka's expression softened slightly. "Good boys underneath wildness. Just need firm hand?" Rebecca found herself smiling. "Like all boys there. Age." "Like Thomas," Maka agreed, nodding toward where her son slept. "Strong spirit. Needs guidance to channel strength." The casual insight into her son's nature surprised her. Maka had observed Thomas closely during their time together, had seen both his strengths and his needs. It was more than Martha Prescott had ever bothered to do, despite being the boy's blood relative. Before they could continue their conversation, Thomas stirred, sitting up and blinking in the dim pre-dawn light. "Is it time to go?" he asked, his voice husky with sleep. "Soon," Maka confirmed. "First, eat." He produced several strips of bark from his pack, peeling away the outer layer to reveal the softer inner bark. "Pine cambium," he explained. "Not tasty, but gives strength." Thomas accepted his portion without complaint, though his expression as he chewed told Rebecca it was far from pleasant. Sophia, once awakened, was less stoic, making a face after the first bite, but continuing at Rebecca's gentle insistence. "Medicine bark," Maka told the little girl with a hint of amusement, "makes you strong like bear after winter sleep." This explanation seemed to satisfy Sophia, who finished her portion with renewed determination, clearly taken with the idea of bear-like strength. Rebecca ate her own share, finding the inner bark bitter but not intolerable. It left a resinous aftertaste that lingered even after she had melted snow to drink. As the first grey light of dawn filtered through the trees, they broke camp. Maka extinguished the fire completely, burying it under snow to ensure no ember remained to betray their presence. Rebecca helped the children secure their snowshoes, while Maka packed the few items they had used overnight. "River crossing dangerous," he warned as they prepared to set out. "Follow exactly where Maka steps. Ice strong in some places, weak in others." Rebecca nodded, her stomach clenching with anxiety. She remembered all too well the stories Daniel had told of travelers lost beneath river ice, how the current carried them downstream, how they clawed at the unyielding surface from below until the cold claimed them. "Thomas, you'll go right," "Behind Maka," she instructed. "Sophia and I will follow. Step only where he steps, understand?" Thomas nodded solemnly, his earlier sleepiness replaced by tense alertness. Even at 10, he understood the gravity of what lay ahead. They walked in silence to the river's edge, where the flowing water had created a complex landscape of ice. Solid sheets in some areas, thin crusts in others, open patches where the current ran too swiftly to freeze. Maka surveyed it carefully, then pointed downstream. "Cross there, narrow point, less current." The crossing point he had chosen was where the river pinched between two large boulders, creating a natural bridge of ice perhaps 15 feet across. Still, Rebecca could hear water rushing beneath the frozen surface, a constant reminder of the danger lurking below. Maka removed his snowshoes, gesturing for them to do the same. "Better grip on ice without," he explained. He secured the snowshoes to his pack, then took a length of hide rope from his supplies, tying one end around his waist and offering the other to Rebecca. "Tie to yourself, then, children," he instructed. "If one falls, others can pull to safety." The precaution did little to ease Rebecca's fear, but she obeyed, securing the rope around her own waist before connecting Thomas and Sophia. The children watched wide-eyed as she checked each knot, their small faces solemn in the early morning light. "Ready?" Maka asked, meeting each of their gazes in turn. Rebecca took a deep breath, then nodded. Thomas squared his shoulders, trying to appear brave. Sophia clutched her mother's hand, but gave a tiny nod of her own. Maka stepped onto the ice first, testing each placement before committing his weight. The surface creaked ominously but held. He advanced a few more careful steps, then motioned for Thomas to follow. The boy moved forward, his feet sliding slightly on the slick surface. Rebecca held her breath until he reached the point where Maka waited. "Now," Maka called softly to Rebecca, "come. Slow steps." Rebecca lifted Sophia into her arms, ignoring the strain on her already exhausted muscles. Better to carry the child than risk her falling through on her own. She stepped onto the ice, feeling it shift slightly beneath her weight. The sound of rushing water seemed to grow louder, as if the river were alive and aware of their intrusion. Halfway across, a sharp crack split the air. Rebecca froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Ahead of her, Maka raised one hand in a silent command to stay still. He studied the ice, then carefully shifted his position. "Move left," he directed, "toward large rock, ice stronger there." Rebecca obeyed, edging sideways with painstaking care. Sophia whimpered softly against her neck, but remained still, instinctively understanding the need for caution. Another step, then another. The rope between them remained taut, a lifeline connecting the four of them across the treacherous surface. 3/4 of the way across, disaster struck. A section of ice beneath Rebecca's right foot gave way with a sound, like splintering glass. She lurched forward, dropping to one knee to distribute her weight, somehow maintaining her grip on Sophia even as icy water soaked through her skirt. The little girl screamed, a high, piercing sound that echoed off the surrounding rocks. "Don't move!" Maka's command cut through Sophia's cries. He was already pulling on the rope, dragging Rebecca and Sophia away from the weakened section. Thomas, terror evident on his face, braced his feet and pulled as well, his small body straining with the effort. Inch by painful inch, they drew, Rebecca and Sophia towards stronger ice. Water seeped through Rebecca's clothing, the cold so intense it felt like fire against her skin. She gritted her teeth against the pain, focusing only on keeping Sophia safe, on moving toward Maka's outstretched hand. When they finally reached the far bank, Rebecca collapsed onto the snow, her legs numb, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. Sophia clung to her, sobbing, while Thomas hovered nearby, his face pale with fear. Maka acted swiftly, stripping off Rebecca's water-soaked boots and stockings. "Need fire," he said tersely, "or lose feet to cold." Rebecca nodded, unable to speak through chattering teeth. The pain was excruciating as circulation began to return to her extremities. Marca gathered wood with remarkable speed, using materials from his pack to start a fire almost instantly. He wrapped her feet in one of the dry furs, then began massaging them, firmly restoring blood flow despite her gasps of pain. "Hurts," she managed to say. "Pain good," he replied, "means not frozen dead." The blunt assessment startled a weak laugh from her, which quickly turned into a sob. She had come so close to falling completely through the ice, to being swept away from her children forever, if not for Marca's quick action, for the rope connecting them. "Thank you," she whispered, catching his hand as he worked. Again. His dark eyes met hers, something fierce and unguarded in their depths. "Would not let you fall." The simple statement carried a weight beyond the immediate danger they had faced. Rebecca felt it settle in her chest, warm despite the cold still seeping through her clothes. For a moment, they remained connected, her hand on his gaze locked with hers. Then Thomas approached, carrying Marca's pack, and the moment passed. "Can make trading post by sun high," Marca said, returning to practicalities, "but need dry clothes first, or sickness comes." He produced a spare buckskin shirt and leggings from his pack, offering them to Rebecca. "Not woman's clothes," he acknowledged, "but dry." Rebecca hesitated only briefly before accepting. Modesty seemed a trivial concern compared to hypothermia. She sent the children to gather more firewood, then quickly changed behind a screen of pines, discarding her sodden dress and petticoats. Marca's clothes were too large but wonderfully dry, the leather soft against her skin. She cinched the leggings with a length of cord and emerged from her makeshift changing area, feeling strange but considerably warmer. Thomas stared at her transformed appearance, his expression caught between shock and fascination. Sophia simply looked relieved to see her mother upright and moving again. Marca gave a nod of approval before handing her a pair of moccasins to replace her ruined boots. "Better for walking anyway," he said. "White women's shoes not made for mountains." Rebecca couldn't argue with that assessment. Her boots had been designed for settlement life, not wilderness travel. The moccasins, though unusual, conformed to her feet in a way her rigid boots never had. They lingered by the fire, only long enough for Rebecca to stop shaking, for feeling to return fully to her extremities. Time was precious now. Wet clothes in winter could be a death sentence if not dried quickly, and the trading post offered their best chance for proper warmth and recovery. As they prepared to set out again, Rebecca caught Marca studying her with an odd expression. "What is it?" she asked, self-conscious in her borrowed attire. He seemed to hesitate, then said, "Look more free now, less captured." The observation startled her. She had never thought of her regular clothes as a form of confinement, but there was truth in his words. The heavy skirts, restrictive. Corset and pinching boots had been a constant hindrance during their journey, practical for a settler's wife perhaps, but ill-suited to survival in the wilderness. "I feel different," she admitted. "Lighter." Marca nodded as if this confirmed something he had already known. Sometimes need to shed old skin to survive new world. The simple wisdom of his statement resonated with Rebecca. Wasn't that what she was doing? Shedding the skin of her old life, wife, settler, dependent, and growing something new and stronger to protect herself and her children. They traveled more quickly now. The trading post their clear destination, safety almost within reach. Rebecca found the moccasins far superior for navigating the snow, and without her heavy skirts, she moved with greater ease. Thomas kept pace beside her, while Sophia alternated between walking and being carried by Marca when the terrain grew difficult. By mid-morning, they crested a small rise, and Marca pointed to a plume of smoke rising in the distance. "Baptista's trading post," he announced. "Reach by midday." Rebecca felt a surge of hope. After days of wilderness travel, the promise of shelter, warmth, and possibly help was overwhelming. Yet anxiety followed close behind. What would Baptiste make of them? A white woman in Cheyenne clothing, two half-starved children, all in the company of a native warrior. Would he offer assistance or turn them away? As they descended toward the valley where the trading post stood, Rebecca found herself studying Maka's profile, memorizing the strong lines of his face, the quiet dignity of his bearing. If Baptiste welcomed them, but Maka chose to leave, this might be their last day together. The thought created an unexpected ache in her chest. "What will you tell Baptiste?" Maka asked suddenly, as if sensing her thoughts. "About how you came to mountains in winter." Rebecca hadn't considered what story to present. The truth seemed simplest, yet she hesitated to reveal the full extent of Martha Prescott's cruelty, of their desperate circumstances. "I'll tell him that we needed to leave our settlement," she said carefully, "that you found us and helped us reach his trading post." Maka considered this. Baptiste, not easily fooled, will see more than what is said. Then he'll see that we're honest. "People in need of work and shelter," Rebecca replied, with more confidence than she felt. "That's all that matters." They continued in silence for a time, the smoke growing more distinct as they approached. Eventually, the trading post itself came into view, a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney surrounded by several smaller outbuildings. A corral containing 3 horses stood to one side, and a couple of rough wagons were parked nearby. The entire complex was enclosed by a log palisade, protection against both wildlife and hostile humans. As they neared the gate, Maka slowed his pace. "Better if Rebecca approaches first," he said. "White woman and children, less threatening than Cheyenne warrior." The practical wisdom of this suggestion was undeniable, though Rebecca disliked the necessity behind it. "Will you wait here?" "Close enough to watch," he assured her. "Far enough not to alarm." Rebecca nodded, gathering her courage. She smoothed her hair as best she could, painfully aware of her unusual appearance in Maka's buckskins. "Thomas, Sophia, stay close." "To me," she instructed. "Let me do the talking." They approached the gate together, Rebecca resisting the urge to look back at Maka. The gate stood partially open, and as they drew nearer, a large dog began to bark from somewhere inside the palisade. Moments later, a bearded face appeared in the opening, suspicious eyes taking in the strange trio. "What do you want?" the man demanded, one hand resting on what Rebecca assumed was a weapon concealed behind the gate. "We're looking for Mr. Baptiste," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "We've traveled far and seek shelter." The man's eyes narrowed as he took in her Cheyenne clothing and the exhausted children. "Where'd you come from dressed like that? Where's your man?" Rebecca straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated. "My husband is dead. We've come from Pinewood Valley Settlement, guided by a Cheyenne who saved our lives when we were lost in the mountains." At the mention of a Cheyenne guide, the man's hand moved more obviously to his weapon. "This Injun still with you?" "He is nearby," Rebecca acknowledged, her heart pounding. "He has done us no harm, quite the opposite. Without him, we would have perished in the snow." The man seemed unconvinced, but before he could respond further, another voice called from inside the compound. "Who is it, Caleb? Traders this time of year?" A second man appeared beside the first, older, with graying hair pulled back in a queue, and a face weathered by years of frontier life. His most striking feature was his eyes, one blue, one brown, that studied Rebecca and the children with keen intelligence. "Says they're from Pinewood Valley," the first man reported, "brought here by some Cheyenne." The older man, Baptiste, Rebecca presumed, raised an eyebrow. "Pinewood? That's a good 60 miles west. And what Cheyenne would guide settlers through? The mountains in winter." His mismatched gaze seemed to penetrate straight through Rebecca's carefully constructed composure. "There's a story here worth hearing, I think." To Rebecca's surprise, he pushed the gate wider and gestured them inside. "Come in, madame. You and your little ones look half frozen and fully starved. We can talk by the fire." Rebecca hesitated, glancing back to where Marca waited just within the tree line. "Our guide comes too," Baptiste said decisively. "Any man, red or white, who'd help a woman and children through these mountains in winter deserves at least a meal and a civil word." Relief flooded through Rebecca. She waved to Marca, who emerged from the trees and approached cautiously, his expression guarded. Baptiste studied him as he drew nearer, recognition dawning in his weathered face. "Well now, if it isn't the hermit of the high country. Didn't expect to see you before spring thaw, Marca." Marca inclined his head slightly. "Baptiste." The familiarity between them eased some of Rebecca's anxiety. Clearly the two men knew each other, perhaps even respected one another. "Interesting company you're keeping these days," Baptiste observed, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "Best come inside before you all freeze solid on my doorstep." He led them through the gate into a courtyard of packed earth, currently dusted with snow. The main building of the trading post was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with a covered porch running its length. Smoke rose steadily from the stone chimney, promising warmth within. As they crossed the courtyard, two boys emerged from one of the outbuildings, their activities interrupted by the arrival of strangers. The younger, who appeared close to Thomas's age, gaped openly at the newcomers. The older boy, already showing signs of the man he would become, adopted a pose of studied indifference that didn't quite hide his curiosity. "My sons," Baptiste explained briefly. "Jean-Paul and Louis." He called to them in rapid French, instructing them to tend to some task in the stables. The boys complied reluctantly, clearly preferring to stay and observe the unusual visitors. Inside, the trading post was warm and surprisingly well appointed. One large room served multiple purposes. Trading area with shelves of goods along. The walls, living quarters with a table and chairs near the fire, sleeping pallets visible through a partially open door to an adjoining room. Everything was neat and orderly, if somewhat Spartan. Baptiste gestured them toward the fire, where a large iron pot hung, emitting savory smells that made Rebecca's mouth water instantly. Without bothering to ask if they were hungry, he ladled stew into wooden bowls and handed them around, adding, "Chunks of dark bread from a cloth-covered basket. Eat," he said simply, "then talk." Rebecca needed no further encouragement. The stew was rich with game meat and root vegetables, the bread hearty and filling. She had to remind Sophia to slow down, fearing the child might make herself ill after days of near starvation. Thomas ate with single-minded focus, though he remembered his manners enough to murmur thanks when Baptiste offered him a second helping. Marca ate more modestly, his attention seemingly divided between the food and their surroundings. He sat slightly apart from the others, back to the wall, positioned where he could observe both the room's occupants and the door. The habitual wariness spoke volumes about his life experiences. When they had finished eating, Baptiste leaned back in his chair, studying them openly. "Now then," he said, "perhaps you'd care to explain how a settler woman and her children came to be crossing the mountains in the dead of winter, dressed in Cheyenne buckskins and guided by a warrior who typically avoids whites as if they carried the pox." Rebecca set down her spoon, gathering her thoughts. The warmth of the fire, the first real meal in days, and the relative safety of the trading post had created a dangerous temptation to let down her guard completely. But she needed to be careful. Not to lie, but to present their situation in a way that might encourage Baptiste's continued hospitality. "My husband, Daniel Mitchell, died 3 months ago," she began, deciding that simple truth was the best approach. "We lived with his sister and her husband while I tried to determine what to do next. But tensions grew, and eventually they asked us to leave." "Asked you to leave," Baptiste repeated, skepticism evident in his tone. In February, with 2 young children and nowhere to go, Rebecca flushed, the harsh reality of Martha's actions starkly illuminated by his incredulity. They felt we had become a burden, that Daniel's charity died with him. Baptiste swore softly in French. "Some Christian charity," he muttered. "And how did you come to meet our friend Marca here?" "He found us," Rebecca said simply. "We had taken shelter in an abandoned building in the forest. He brought food, supplies. When another storm threatened, he offered to guide us to your trading post." Baptiste turned his mismatched gaze to Marca. "That true? You just happened upon them in the wilderness?" Marca met his gaze steadily. "Great Spirit puts people in our path for reason, could not leave women and children to die." Something unspoken seemed to pass between the 2 men, some shared understanding that Rebecca couldn't quite decipher. Finally, Baptiste nodded, as if coming to a decision. "Well, Mrs. Mitchell, it seems you and your little ones have had quite the ordeal. Question is, what do you plan to do now?" This was the moment Rebecca had been dreading. She had no plan, no resources, nowhere to go. Her entire future, and her children's, hung on the response of this stranger. "I was a teacher before I married," she said carefully. "Marca mentioned that you have sons who might benefit from education. I would be willing to instruct them in exchange for shelter for myself and my children, at least until spring makes travel easier." Baptiste's eyebrows rose. "A teacher, eh? Formal schooling?" "Yes," Rebecca confirmed. "Literature, mathematics, history, natural philosophy. I taught at a girls' academy in St. Louis before coming west." Interest flickered. In Baptiste's eyes, "My boys are wild as March hares. Their mother wanted them educated proper, but she's been gone these 5 years, and there's no school within 100 miles. He stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Could use an extra pair of hands around here too. Trading season starts soon, and Caleb can't manage everything while I'm dealing with the customers." Hope bloomed in Rebecca's chest. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Baptiste." "Just Baptiste," he corrected. "Everyone calls me that, even the natives." He studied her for another long moment, then nodded decisively. "Very well, Mrs. Mitchell. You and your children can stay until spring, at least. You'll teach my boys their letters and figures and help with the running of the place in exchange for room and board. We'll see how it goes from there." Relief washed over Rebecca in a dizzying wave. She had secured shelter, food, and safety for her children, the immediate necessities that had consumed her thoughts since Martha had cast them out. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We won't be a burden, I promise." Baptiste waved away her gratitude. "Place needs a woman's touch anyway. Been too long with just men about." He turned to Marca, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "And what about you, heading back to your mountain hideaway?" Rebecca held her breath, suddenly intensely aware of how much she wanted Marca to stay. Not just for Thomas's sake, or for the security his presence provided, but for reasons she wasn't ready to examine too closely. Marca glanced at her briefly, before answering. "Need to check traps, collect belongings from lodge." He paused, then added, "But may return. Beaver pelts fetch better price here than at western posts." It wasn't a commitment to stay, but neither was it a definitive departure. Rebecca tried to hide her relief, uncertain why it mattered so much. Baptiste seemed amused by the exchange, his weathered face creasing in a knowing smile. "Well, you're welcome here any time, Marca. Always pay fair for quality furs." He rose from his chair, signaling an end to the discussion. "Caleb will show you where you can sleep, Mrs. Mitchell. Boys' lessons can start tomorrow, once you've had a proper rest." The quarters Baptiste provided were simple but clean. A small room off the main building that had once served as a storeroom, now hastily converted with pallets, blankets, and a small brazier for heat. It was barely larger than a closet, but after days in the wilderness, it felt luxurious to Rebecca. As Sophia curled up on one of the pallets, already half asleep after the exhaustion of their journey and the comfort of a full meal, Thomas lingered at the door, his expression troubled. "What about Marca?" he asked. "Where will he sleep?" "Mr. Baptiste has offered him space in the stable loft," Rebecca explained, having overheard the arrangement. "He'll be warm and dry there." Thomas frowned. "But he's not a horse. He saved us. He should sleep in a real bed." "Thomas," Rebecca said gently, "Marca is used to different accommodations than we are. The stable is likely more comfortable than many places he's slept." She touched her son's shoulder. "And tomorrow, he'll be leaving to retrieve his belongings from his lodge." "But he's coming back, right?" Thomas's voice held a note of desperation that tugged at Rebecca's heart. "He said he might come back." "Yes, he did." She chose her words carefully, not wanting to promise what she couldn't guarantee. "But Marca has his own life, his own path. We must be grateful for what he's done for us without expecting more." Thomas's frown deepened. "He likes us, I can tell, and he's teaching me important things like Pa used to." The comparison to Daniel sent a pang through Rebecca's chest. "I know you miss your father, sweetheart, and Marca has been very kind to teach you, but he's not—" She stopped, unsure how to continue. "Not what?" Thomas challenged. "Not family? Not like us?" "That's not what I meant," Rebecca said, though in truth it had been close to her thoughts. "Only that we can't expect him to change his entire life for our sake." Thomas looked unconvinced, but didn't argue further. He crawled onto his pallet, turning his face to the wall in a gesture of withdrawal that reminded Rebecca painfully of Daniel when he had been upset. Rebecca sat on her own pallet, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the past days. They had survived the wilderness, found shelter and the promise of work, ensured their immediate safety. Yet there was a hollow feeling beneath her relief, an uncertainty about what came next, about where they truly belonged in this harsh new world. And there was Marca, the enigmatic man who had saved them, guided them, protected them without asking anything in return, the man who had awakened feelings in her that she had thought buried with Daniel, feelings that both comforted and confused her. She lay down beside Sophia, pulling the blanket over both of them. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of the trading post settling for the night. Baptiste's voice giving instructions to his sons, Caleb checking the gates, the creak of the stable door where Marca had gone to rest. Tomorrow, he would leave. Perhaps return, perhaps not. The thought created an ache in her chest that she wasn't ready to acknowledge, let alone understand. Instead, she closed her eyes and surrendered to exhaustion, letting sleep claim her before her troubled thoughts could keep her awake. Rebecca woke to unfamiliar sounds, voices speaking French, the clatter of utensils, the neigh of horses from the nearby stable. For a moment she was disoriented, the small room and rough pallets a stark contrast to the wilderness they had traversed. For days, then Sophia stirred beside her, and Thomas sat up from his own bedding, and the reality of their situation came flooding back. They had reached the trading post. They were safe, for now. Sunlight streamed through the room's single small window, indicating that they had slept late. Rebecca rose quickly, helping the children dress in their travel-worn clothes. She remained in Marca's buckskins, having nothing else to wear until her own dress dried completely. In the main room of the trading post, Baptiste and his sons were already finishing breakfast. The trader greeted them with a nod, indicating the remaining food on the table. "Thought you might need the rest," he said. "Marca left at first light, said to tell you he'd return in 7 days if the weather holds." 7 days. The information settled in Rebecca's chest, not the indefinite. Departure she had feared, but a specific promise of return. She nodded, trying to hide how much the news affected her. "That was kind of him to let us know," she said neutrally, helping Sophia to a plate of cornbread and dried fruit. Baptiste gave her a knowing look, but didn't comment further. Instead, he introduced his sons properly, Jean-Paul, the elder at 13, and Louis, who was 9. Both boys regarded Rebecca with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Their mother taught them some basic reading before she passed, Baptiste explained. But neither has had formal schooling. The nearest school's in Cedar Ridge, and that's a 3-day journey in good weather. "I understand," Rebecca said. "We can begin today if you'd like. I'll need to assess what they already know." Baptiste nodded, apparently satisfied. "Boys, you'll mind Mrs. Mitchell and do as she says. Your mother wanted you educated proper, and now's your chance." He turned to Rebecca. "My quarters are through there. You can use the table for lessons. I'll be in the trading room most of the day." With that, he left them to their breakfast, disappearing through a door that presumably led to the trading area of the post. Jean-Paul watched him go, then fixed Rebecca with a challenging stare. "We don't need no woman teacher," he declared in heavily accented English. "Papa teaches us what we need to know." Rebecca met his gaze calmly. "Your father is a wise man, I'm sure, but he asked me to supplement your education with reading, writing, and mathematics. These are skills that will serve you well as you grow." "For what?" the boy scoffed. "To count furs? Don't need fancy schooling for that." "Jean-Paul," Thomas spoke up unexpectedly, "my pa said that education is like having extra eyes and ears. It lets you see and hear things other people miss." The older boy looked startled at being addressed so directly by someone younger than himself. "Your pa was a teacher too?" Thomas shook his head. "He was a logger, but he read every night. Said books were windows to places he'd never see himself." Rebecca felt a surge of pride in her son's defense of education, in his memory of Daniel's words. Jean-Paul seemed momentarily at a loss for a response, his bravado deflated by Thomas's matter-of-fact statement. "Well," Rebecca said, seizing the opportunity, "perhaps we can start by seeing what you already know. After breakfast, we'll sit down together and I'll ask you some questions. No pressure, just to understand where to begin." Louis, the younger boy, who had remained silent until now, looked up from his plate. "Will we learn about animals and plants, like in Mama's book?" "Of course we will," Rebecca assured the younger boy with a warm smile. "Nature is one of the most fascinating subjects to study. Perhaps we can even take walks outside when the weather permits to observe plants and animals firsthand." Louis' face brightened at this prospect, while Jean-Paul maintained his skeptical expression, though with less conviction than before. Thomas looked pleased at having made a positive impression, and Sophia watched the proceedings with wide, curious eyes. The initial assessment of the boy's knowledge revealed exactly what Rebecca had expected: patchy education with significant gaps. Jean-Paul could read simple texts, but struggled with more complex vocabulary. His arithmetic was limited to basic addition and subtraction, with little understanding of multiplication or division. Louis knew his letters and could write his name, but read only the simplest words. Neither had any formal knowledge of history, geography, or natural philosophy. Rebecca designed a schedule that would address these deficiencies while keeping the boys engaged. Reading and writing in the mornings, arithmetic before midday meal, and more interactive lessons on history, geography, and natural studies in the afternoons. She included Thomas and Sophia in the lessons, finding that Thomas's enthusiasm helped motivate the initially reluctant Jean-Paul, while Sophia and Louis quickly formed a bond over their shared interest in animals. The days developed a rhythm. Mornings began with chores, helping to prepare breakfast, fetching water, feeding the horses. Then came lessons at the large table in Baptiste's quarters, the surface cleared of trading ledgers and fur samples to make room for slates and books. Afternoons often involved practical applications of what they had learned, measuring the dimensions of the trading post for a mathematics lesson, identifying plants in Baptiste's small herb garden for natural studies, or mapping the immediate area surrounding the post for geography. Rebecca found unexpected pleasure in teaching again. The boys, despite their initial resistance, proved to be quick learners when properly engaged. Even Jean-Paul gradually shed his defensive attitude as he discovered the satisfaction of mastering new concepts, particularly mathematics, for which he showed a natural aptitude. In the evenings, after the children were settled, Rebecca assisted Baptiste with various tasks around the trading post, mending clothes, organizing supplies, helping to prepare meals. The trader proved to be a fair-minded employer, neither expecting too much nor tolerating laziness. His gruff manner concealed a fundamentally decent nature, and Rebecca soon found herself comfortable in his presence. "You've worked wonders with those boys," Baptiste commented one evening as they sat by the fire, reviewing the trading ledgers. "Jean-Paul actually asked for a book yesterday. Nearly fell over from shock." Rebecca smiled, pleased by the compliment. They're bright children. They just needed structure and encouragement. "Their mother would be grateful," Baptiste said, his mismatched eyes growing distant. "Marie always worried they'd grow up wild, with no education but what the mountains could teach them." "Was she from a city originally?" Rebecca asked, sensing an opening to learn more about her employer. Baptiste nodded, adding another log to the fire. "St. Louis, daughter of a fur company agent. Met her when I came to sell my season's take. She was the most refined woman I'd ever seen, but with fire in her eyes." He smiled faintly at the memory. "Everyone said she was mad to marry a half-breed trader and move to the wilderness. Maybe she was." "She must have loved you very much," Rebecca observed softly. "She did," Baptiste acknowledged. "And I her. Made this place a real home for 5 years before the fever took her." He gestured around the room where subtle touches of feminine influence remained. Curtains at the windows, a patchwork quilt. On a chair, dried flowers arranged in a clay vase. "Been trying to honor her wishes for the boys ever since, but it ain't easy with no proper school nearby." "You've done well by them," Rebecca assured him. "They're good boys, respectful and intelligent. That speaks to your parenting." Baptiste accepted the compliment with a nod, then changed the subject, asking about her progress with the inventory he had assigned her. The moment of personal revelation was over, but Rebecca felt she understood him better. The gruff exterior, hiding a man who had loved deeply and lost, who was doing his best to raise sons alone in a harsh environment. Not unlike her own situation, in many ways. The 7 days Maka had specified passed with agonizing slowness. Rebecca tried not to watch the trail leading to the trading post, tried not to listen for his distinctive step, but found herself doing both despite her best efforts. Thomas made no attempt to hide his anticipation, asking Baptiste each morning if there had been any sign of the Cheyenne warrior's return. On the evening of the 7th day, as they sat at dinner, a commotion outside drew their attention. Baptiste rose, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol he kept at his belt, and moved to the window. "Well," he said, his tone revealing nothing, "seems your Cheyenne has returned." Thomas leapt from his seat and raced to the door before Rebecca could stop him. She rose more sedately, straightening her dress, one of Marie's that Baptiste had given her, altered to fit her taller frame, and smoothing her hair in a gesture that she immediately recognized as vanity. She flushed, embarrassed by her own reaction, but couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation in her chest. Maka stood in the courtyard, his pack laden with furs and supplies from his lodge. Thomas had already reached him and was talking animatedly, pointing toward the small garden, where they had been implementing some of their science lessons. The Cheyenne warrior listened with grave attention, nodding occasionally at whatever Thomas was explaining. As Rebecca approached, Maka looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers across the courtyard. Something passed between them. Recognition, acknowledgement, perhaps more, before he returned his attention to Thomas's enthusiastic narrative. "Welcome back," Rebecca said when she reached them, hoping her voice sounded calmer than she felt. "We weren't certain you would return." Maka studied her for a moment, said would come. Maka keeps word. The simple statement shouldn't have affected her as it did, but Rebecca felt warmth spread through her chest. In a world where promises were easily broken, where family bonds like Martha Prescott's had proved meaningless, Maka's straightforward integrity was profoundly moving. "Well, now you're here, you might as well come inside and eat," Baptiste called from the doorway. "Boy's been talking of nothing else for days." Maka hefted his pack and followed them into the trading post. Inside, he moved with the same quiet awareness that Rebecca had observed in the wilderness, his eyes taking in everything, the lessons still visible on the slate board, the changes Rebecca had made to the living area, the addition of drawings the children had created, now decorating one wall. "You have been busy," he commented as he set down his pack. "Mrs. Mitchell has been teaching us all sorts of things," Louis piped up, his earlier shyness around the Cheyenne warrior apparently forgotten. "About plants and animals and numbers and even the stars." Maka's expression softened slightly as he looked at the youngest boy. "Stars important, show way when lost." "That's what Mrs. Mitchell said too," Louis exclaimed. "She showed us the North Star and how to find it." As they settled around the table for the evening meal, Rebecca observed the subtle shifts in dynamics. Baptiste was cordial but watchful, his eyes moving between Maka and Rebecca with speculative interest. The children were openly delighted by the warrior's return, even Sophia showing more animation than usual. And Maka himself seemed different, somehow more present, less guarded, though still economical with his words. After dinner, as the children helped clear the table, Baptiste invited Maka to inspect his latest furs. The two men retreated to the trading room, leaving Rebecca alone with her thoughts. She busied herself with preparations for the next days, lessons, trying not to dwell on what Maka's return might mean or on the undeniable reaction she had felt upon seeing him again. Later, as she tucked the children into bed in the small room they now shared, Thomas asked the question she had been dreading. "Is Maka going to stay this time?" Rebecca sighed, smoothing his red hair back from his forehead. "I don't know, sweetheart. That's for him to decide." "But he came back," Thomas persisted. "That means something, doesn't it?" "It means he keeps his promises," Rebecca said carefully, "and that he had business with Mr. Baptiste. Beyond that, we shouldn't assume." Thomas didn't look convinced. "He watches you, you know, when you're not looking, the way Pa used to." The observation startled Rebecca, both for its perceptiveness and for the comparison to Daniel. "Thomas, that's not," she began, unsure how to continue. "It's true," the boy insisted, "and you watch him too. I've seen you." Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's time for sleep," she said firmly, changing the subject. "We have plenty of lessons to cover tomorrow." Thomas allowed the deflection, though his expression suggested he wasn't fooled. Rebecca kissed both children goodnight and retreated to the main room, her thoughts in turmoil. Was her son right? Had she been watching Maka in a way that revealed her confused feelings? And more unsettling still, had Maka been watching her? She found Baptiste alone by the fire, nursing a mug of coffee laced with something stronger from the smell of it. He gestured for her to join him, offering a drink which she politely declined. "Marcaz settled in the stable loft again," he informed. "Her. Says he'll stay a few days to trade his furs and rest before heading back to check his trap lines." Rebecca nodded, trying to appear casually interested rather than intensely relieved. "He brought quite a collection of pelts. Fine quality too," Baptiste agreed. Man knows his work. He studied her over the rim of his mug. Seems he knows a few other things as well. I'm not sure what you mean, Rebecca said, though she suspected she did. Baptiste set down his mug, his expression turning serious. Mrs. Mitchell, Rebecca, I don't presume to know what passed between you and the Cheyenne during your journey here, and it ain't my business to pry. But I feel I should warn you. There's nothing inappropriate between us, Rebecca interrupted, heat rising in her face. Didn't say there was, Baptiste replied mildly. Was only going to warn you that such things don't often end well in these parts. White woman, Indian man, folks take a dim view, even those who ain't particularly prejudiced otherwise. Rebecca felt a complex mix of emotions, embarrassment at having her feelings so easily read, defensiveness at the implication, yet also gratitude for the well-intentioned warning. Mr. Baptiste, she said carefully, Maka saved my children's lives, and mine. I owe him a debt I can never repay. That's all there is between us. The trader nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Fair enough. Just thought someone ought to say it, being as you're new to the frontier and might not understand how things stand. I appreciate your concern, Rebecca said, rising from her chair, but there's no need. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should prepare for tomorrow's lessons. Baptiste didn't try to stop her as she retreated to the small room she used for lesson preparation, a converted pantry adjacent to the main room. Once inside, she leaned against the door, her heart pounding. The trader's warning had forced her to confront feelings she had been studiously avoiding. The quickening of her pulse when Maka was near, the way her eyes sought him out, the comfort she found in his steady presence. Daniel had been gone only 4 months. Was she betraying his memory by feeling this way about another man? And not just any man, but one from a completely different world, one whom society would condemn her for even admiring. The very idea was preposterous, unthinkable, and yet she couldn't deny the truth of what Thomas had observed. She did watch Maka, and perhaps he watched her too. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind churning with conflicted thoughts. By morning, she had resolved to maintain strict propriety in her interactions with Maka during his stay, to give no one, least of all herself, reason to believe there was anything beyond gratitude and respect between them. This resolution proved harder to maintain than she had anticipated. Over the following days, Maka integrated himself into the daily life of the trading post in unexpected ways. He helped Baptiste repair the north wall of the palisade, which had been damaged in the last storm. He showed the boys how to set rabbit snares in the nearby woods, supplementing their meals with fresh game. He even assisted with Rebecca's natural science lessons, taking the children on short excursions to identify plants and animal tracks in the surrounding area. His presence became so natural, so comfortable, that Rebecca found herself forgetting to maintain her careful distance. She caught herself laughing at his dry observations, seeking his opinion on various matters, watching the graceful economy of his movements as he demonstrated proper knife handling to Thomas. 4 days after his arrival, Maka announced his intention to leave the following morning to check his traplines farther north. The news cast a pall over the evening meal, with Thomas openly disappointed and even Jean-Paul looking somewhat downcast. Rebecca kept her own reaction carefully neutral, though she felt a hollowness in her chest at the prospect of his departure. That night, unable to sleep, she wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped outside into the crisp night air. The courtyard was quiet, the only sounds the occasional stamp of horses in the stable and the distant call of an owl. Stars blazed overhead. In the clear mountain sky, a spectacular display that still took her breath away after weeks at the trading post. She was so absorbed in the celestial view that she didn't notice Maka's approach until he spoke. "Stars watch over all people," he said quietly. "Same stars my ancestors saw, Same stars your people crossed ocean beneath. Rebecca started slightly, then composed herself. They make me feel small, she admitted, in a good way, as if my problems are just tiny specks in something much larger. Maka nodded, understanding in his expression. Good medicine for troubled heart. They stood in silence for a moment, both gazing upward. Rebecca was acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the warmth that seemed to radiate from him, despite the chilly night air. You leave tomorrow, she said finally. Yes, trap lines need checking. Spring comes soon, ice melts. Will you? She hesitated, unsure how to phrase her question without revealing too much. Will you return? Maka turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the starlight. Want Maka to return? The directness of his question caught her off guard. Honesty warred with propriety in her mind. But something about the vast night sky and the quiet intimacy of the moment made dissembling seem pointless. Yes, she said simply. The children miss you when you're gone. Only children? He asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks, grateful for the darkness that hid her reaction. I appreciate your help. With the lessons, the boys are more engaged when you're here. Maka said nothing for a long moment, his gaze steady on her face. Rebecca had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through her careful deflection to the truth beneath. We'll return in 10 days, he said finally. Bring more furs for Baptiste, more stories for children. He paused, then added, more stars for Rebecca to see. With that, he inclined his head slightly and walked away, leaving her standing alone beneath the vast, star-strewn sky, her heart pounding and her thoughts in disarray. True to his word, Maka returned 10 days later, and again after that. A pattern established itself. He would stay at the trading post for several days, trading furs, helping with repairs, contributing to the children's education, then depart. To check his trap lines or visit his winter lodge, always with a specific promise of when he would return. Each time he came back, Rebecca found it harder to maintain her emotional distance. Each time he left, the hollow feeling in her chest grew more pronounced. She tried to focus on her teaching, on making herself indispensable to Baptiste, on building a stable foundation for her children's future. But increasingly, her thoughts turned to Maka, to his quiet wisdom, his understated strength, his unexpected gentleness with Sophia, his patience with Thomas. Spring arrived in the mountains, transforming the landscape almost overnight. Snow melted from south-facing slopes, revealing tender green shoots beneath. Streams swelled with runoff, their voices louder, more insistent. Birds returned from southern migrations, filling the air with song. The trading post grew busier as travelers, and traders emerged from winter isolation, bringing news, goods, and the energy of renewed activity. Among the visitors was a fur company representative named Hargrove, a well-dressed Easterner with polished manners and a shrewd business sense. He arrived with 2 assistants and a wagon load of trade goods, intending to negotiate bulk purchases from the independent trappers and traders who frequented Baptiste's post. His arrival coincided with one of Maka's stays, creating an immediate tension that Rebecca could feel the moment the 2 men laid eyes on each other. Hargrove's cordial demeanor cooled noticeably when introduced to the Cheyenne warrior, his handshake perfunctory, his gaze dismissive. Maka, for his part, acknowledged the Easterner with characteristic reserve, neither seeking nor avoiding interaction. But Rebecca noticed the subtle shift in his posture, the increased awareness, the way he positioned himself within the trading post to keep Hargrove always in his line of sight. Don't mind Hargrove, Baptiste told her quietly when he noticed her watching the strained dynamics. Man's got no use for anyone with red skin unless they're bringing him pelts at cut-rate prices. Been that way since he took over the St. Louis office. The company man stayed 3 days, conducting business with Baptiste and meeting with various trappers who came through. He was unfailingly polite to Rebecca, even complimentary about her work with the children, but she couldn't warm to him. There was something calculating in his pale blue eyes, something that assessed her value as he might evaluate a pelt or a pack animal. On the afternoon before his scheduled departure, Rebecca was gathering herbs in the small garden when Hargrove approached. She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands, and acknowledged him with a polite nod. "Mrs. Mitchell," he began, removing his hat, "I've been meaning to speak with you privately." "Oh?" Rebecca kept her tone neutral, though something in his manner put her instantly on guard. "Yes." Hargrove glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I understand you were a teacher of some repute before your unfortunate circumstances. It brought you here." "I was a teacher, yes," she confirmed, wondering where this was leading. "Well, it happens that my employer, the Missouri Fur Company, maintains a small settlement about 100 miles east of here. There are several families with children in need of education." He smiled, clearly believing he was offering something desirable. "We could arrange transportation for you and your children, provide suitable housing, and pay a modest but fair salary for your services." Rebecca blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected proposal. "That's very generous, Mr. Hargrove. I'm somewhat obligated to Mr. Baptiste, however. He's been good enough to give us shelter when we had nowhere else to go." Hargrove waved a dismissive hand. "Baptiste will find another arrangement. Man like him always does." His gaze grew more intent. "The settlement offers advantages this trading post cannot. Proper society, other women, a more suitable environment for raising children, particularly a young girl." The implication was clear, and Rebecca felt a flare of anger. "My children are quite content here, Mr. Hargrove. They're receiving an education. They're well-fed and safe." "Safe?" Hargrove interrupted, skepticism evident in his tone. "A remote trading post frequented by all manner of rough characters, with your children in close proximity to—" He broke off, glancing toward where Maka stood conferring with Baptiste, near the stables. "Well, let's just say there are concerns about the influences here." Rebecca stiffened. "If you're referring to Mahka, he has shown nothing but kindness and respect to my children and to me. He saved our lives when we were abandoned in the wilderness." "Yes, I've heard the story," Hargrove said, his tone suggesting he found it somewhat dubious. "Noble, savage rescues helpless white woman. Very romantic narrative." His eyes narrowed slightly. "But surely you understand how such associations might be viewed by respectable society, for your children's sake, if not your own." The condescension in his voice, the casual dismissal of Maka's character based solely on his race, ignited a fury in Rebecca that surprised her with its intensity. But she controlled her expression, aware that antagonizing someone of Hargrove's position would be unwise. "I appreciate your concern," she said coolly, "and your offer, but I'm quite satisfied with our current arrangement." Hargrove studied her for a moment, then replaced his hat with deliberate care. "Very well. Should you reconsider, the offer remains open until I leave tomorrow noon. Think carefully, Mrs. Mitchell, about your future, about your children's future." He glanced meaningfully toward Maka once more. "About what's proper." As he walked away, Rebecca remained in the garden, her hands trembling slightly with suppressed anger. The conversation had forced her to confront realities she had been avoiding, not just her growing feelings for Maka, but the societal barriers that made those feelings so complicated, so potentially destructive. Hargrove's offer was practical, sensible, a proper job in a proper settlement with proper people, the kind of opportunity a widow with 2 children should grasp with both hands, the kind of opportunity Daniel would want for them. Yet the thought of leaving the trading post, of leaving Maka, created a physical ache in her chest. And not just for herself. Thomas had flourished under the Cheyenne's guidance, gaining confidence and skills that had transformed him from a grieving, bewildered boy into a more centered, capable young man. Even Sophia, who had regained her voice in Maka's lodge, seemed to bloom whenever he was present, her natural shyness giving way to curiosity and engagement. Rebecca was still lost in these thoughts when a shadow fell across the garden. She looked up to find Maka standing nearby, his expression questioning. "Hargrove man upset you," he observed. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Not upset, Rebecca clarified, just thoughtful. "He made me an offer, a teaching position at the fur company's settlement east of here." Maka's face revealed nothing, but Rebecca sensed a subtle withdrawal, as if he were already preparing himself for her departure. "Good opportunity," he said neutrally. "Safer place for children." "That's what he suggested," Rebecca replied, studying Maka's impassive features. He seemed particularly concerned about the influences here. Specifically, your influence. A flicker of something, anger perhaps, or resignation, crossed Maka's face before it settled back into its usual composed expression. "White man's fear, old story." "It's not just fear," Rebecca said, frustration coloring her voice. "It's arrogance, ignorance, the assumption that different means lesser." She shook her head. "Thomas has learned more from you in these past weeks than he would in a year at some proper Eastern school. You've shown him how to read the land, how to respect nature, how to be self-sufficient. How dare Hargrove imply that's somehow harmful?" Maka regarded her steadily, something softening in his dark eyes. "World is what it is, cannot change minds set like stone." "But we can change ourselves," Rebecca insisted. "We can choose what we believe, who we value." She faltered slightly on the last words, aware of how close she was coming to revealing feelings best kept hidden. "Yes," Maka agreed quietly. "Can choose, but choices have consequences." He glanced toward the main building, where Thomas could be seen helping Louis with some task. "For children, too." The simple statement cut through Rebecca's indignation, reminding her of the wider implications of any decision she might make. Her choices didn't affect her alone. They shaped Thomas and Sophia's future, their place in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. "I know," she acknowledged softly. "That's what makes it so difficult." They stood in silence for a moment, the spring sunlight warming the garden around them, the scent of awakening earth and new growth filling the air. Finally, Maka spoke again, his voice low but clear. "What does Rebecca's heart say?" The directness of the question startled her. No one had asked about her heart, her desires in so long. Even she had pushed those considerations aside, focusing on practical needs, on survival, on what was best for her children. "My heart," she echoed, buying time as conflicting emotions surged within her. "My heart is confused, uncertain." She met his gaze directly. "Afraid." "Of what?" "Of making the wrong choice, of letting my feelings cloud my judgment." She hesitated, then added honestly, "Of wanting things I shouldn't want." Maka held her gaze, something intense and unreadable in his eyes. "Many things world says shouldn't be. Doesn't make them wrong, just difficult." The simple wisdom of his words resonated deeply. Rebecca found herself stepping closer to him, drawn by something beyond rational thought. And if the difficult path is the one that feels right, what then? "Then must be brave," Maka said softly. "Must trust own heart more than others' fears." They stood facing each other, closer than propriety allowed, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Rebecca could feel her heart pounding, could sense the same awareness in Maka's carefully controlled posture, in the way his eyes never left hers. The moment was broken by Thomas's voice calling from the main building. Rebecca stepped back. Quickly, reality intruding on the fragile connection that had formed between them. "Coming!" she called, smoothing her skirt in a habitual gesture. To Marka, she said more quietly, "I need to think. About Mr. Hargrove's offer. About everything." Marka nodded once, understanding in his expression. Time alone helps clear. Thoughts. Marka checked trap lines north of Ridge. He turned to go, then paused. Return tomorrow evening. Rebecca watched him walk away, a complex mixture of emotions churning within her. He was giving her space to decide, to consider Hargrove's offer without his presence influencing her choice. The gesture was both considerate and painful. Another example of the quiet integrity that had drawn her to him in the first place. She spent a restless night weighing her options, listing the practical advantages of Hargrove's offer against the less tangible benefits of remaining at Baptiste's trading post. The settlement would offer more stability, better prospects for the children's future, acceptance in white society. The trading post offered freedom, the opportunity for Thomas to learn from Marka, the chance for Rebecca to follow her heart rather than convention. By morning, she had reached no conclusion. She went through the day's routines mechanically, preparing breakfast, conducting lessons, tending the garden, all while the noon deadline for Hargrove's departure approached inexorably. As the sun climbed toward midday, Rebecca found Baptiste alone in the trading room, reviewing his ledgers. He looked up at her entrance, taking in her troubled expression with a perceptive gaze. "Hargrove made you an offer," he said without preamble. "Teaching position at their settlement." Rebecca wasn't surprised he knew. Little remained private for long at the trading post. "Yes, he's leaving at noon. I need to give him my answer before then." Baptiste set down his pencil, giving her his full attention. "And you're torn." "I am," she admitted. "It's a good opportunity, secure, respectable. But," Baptiste prompted when she fell silent, "but I've come to value the life we've built here. The children are happy, they're learning, growing." She hesitated, then added more softly, "And there's Marka." Baptiste nodded, unsurprised by the admission. "Been watching you two dance around each other for weeks. Wondered when one of you would acknowledge it." Rebecca flushed. "Nothing inappropriate has happened." "Never said it had," Baptiste interrupted mildly. "But feelings don't need actions to exist." He leaned back in his chair, studying her thoughtfully. "Life out here ain't easy, Rebecca, especially for those who choose to walk between worlds. Marka knows that better than most." "Mr. Hargrove made that abundantly clear," Rebecca said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Men like Hargrove see the world in simple lines: white, Indian, civilized, savage." Baptiste gestured around the trading post. "But out here, those lines blur. Have to for survival." He paused, then added, "Marie was Métis, mixed blood. French father, Crow mother. Faced prejudice from both sides all her life. Never let it define her, though." The revelation surprised Rebecca. Baptiste had never spoken so openly about his late wife before. "How did you handle it? The judgment, the disapproval?" "Carved our own path," he said simply. "Built this place far enough from settlements to avoid the worst of it, close enough to trade when needed. Made our own community of those who judged by character, not color." He smiled faintly at some memory. "Wasn't always easy, but never regretted it, not once." Rebecca absorbed his words, finding unexpected comfort in them. "And your sons, did they suffer for your choice?" "Sometimes," Baptiste acknowledged honestly. "Children can be cruel to those who are different, but they're stronger for it too. Jean-Paul and Louis know who they are, understand both sides of their heritage. That's worth more than easy acceptance by narrow minds." She nodded, her thoughts turning to Thomas and Sophia. Would they be better served by the safer path, the one society approved? or by the example of integrity, of following one's heart despite obstacles? Whatever you decide, Baptiste said, rising from his desk, you and your children have a place here. That won't change. Gratitude welled in Rebecca's chest. Thank you, she said simply. Baptiste nodded, then glanced out the window where Hargrove could be seen supervising the loading of his wagon. Looks like your time for decision is running short. Indeed, the company man was clearly making final preparations for departure. Rebecca took a deep breath, steadying herself. I should speak with him. Baptiste squeezed her shoulder as she passed. Follow your heart, Rebecca. Life's too uncertain for regrets. She found Hargrove inspecting the wagon's contents, checking items against a list in his hand. He looked up at her approach, his expression immediately shifting to one of polite inquiry. Mrs. Mitchell, have you reached a decision regarding my offer? Rebecca met his gaze steadily, suddenly certain of her course. I have, Mr. Hargrove. I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I must decline. My children and I will be remaining at the trading post. Hargrove's expression hardened slightly. I see. May I ask what influenced this decision? Perhaps the terms could be adjusted to better suit your needs. The terms are not the issue, Rebecca said firmly. This is where we belong now, where we can best build our future. Comprehension dawned in Hargrove's eyes as he glanced toward the stable area where Maka's few possessions were stored. Ah, I had heard rumors, but I confess I didn't credit them fully. His tone grew condescending. Consider carefully, Mrs. Mitchell. Such associations rarely end well, particularly for the woman involved. Rebecca felt her spine stiffen at his thinly veiled insult. Mr. Hargrove, I've made my decision based on what's best for my family. I'll thank you to respect that and wish you safe travels. Without waiting for his response, she turned and walked back toward the main building, her head high. She could feel Hargrove's disapproving gaze following her, but for the first time since leaving Pinewood Valley, she felt truly certain of her path. That evening, as promised, Maka returned. Rebecca was in the garden when he arrived, cultivating the newly sprouted herbs that would supplement their meals and medicines. She looked up at his approach, suddenly shy despite the momentous decision she had made. Hargrove man gone, Maka observed, glancing toward the empty space where the company wagon had been parked. Yes, Rebecca confirmed. He left at noon. And Rebecca? Maka asked quietly. Does she leave too? The vulnerability in the question, so unusual from this self-contained man, touched something deep within her. She set down her garden tool and stood facing him directly. No, she said clearly. We're staying. This is where we belong now. Something like relief flickered in Maka's dark eyes, quickly controlled but unmistakable. Trading post good. Place for children, he said neutrally, though his gaze remained intent on her face. It is, Rebecca agreed. They're learning, growing stronger every day. Thomas, especially. She hesitated, then added softly, because of you. Because of what? You teach him? Maka shifted slightly, seemingly uncomfortable with the praise. Boy has good heart, eager to learn. Like his mother, Rebecca said, surprising herself with her boldness. Maka held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. What does Rebecca want to learn? He asked finally, his voice low. The question hung in the air between them, laden with meanings beyond the simple words. Rebecca felt her heart quicken, aware that they were approaching territory from which there would be no easy return. How to be brave, she answered honestly. How to trust my heart more than others' fears. Maka's expression softened at the echo of his own words from the day before. He took a step closer. Maka reached out slowly, as if giving her time to withdraw, and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. The simple gesture held such tenderness that Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. "Brave already," he said, softly. "Faced winter, hunger, strangers, protected children, made new path." "Not alone," she reminded him. "You were there, every step." A moment of understanding passed between them, profound and wordless. Then the sound of children's voices broke the spell. Thomas and Louis returning from checking the rabbit snares Maka had taught them to set. Rebecca stepped back slightly, though the connection between them remained, invisible but tangible. "I should finish here before dark," she said, gesturing to the half-tended garden. Maka nodded. "We'll help Thomas clean rabbits for evening meal." As he walked away, Rebecca realized she was smiling. The weight of indecision had lifted, replaced by a quiet certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever disapproval they might face, she had chosen her path. Not the easiest one, perhaps, but the one that felt true to her heart. Spring deepened into early summer, the trading post growing busier as trappers and travelers took advantage of the improved weather. Baptiste expanded his operations, constructing a new storage building with Maka's help. Rebecca's lessons with the children continued, now often conducted outdoors under the shade of a large cottonwood tree behind the main building. Maka's pattern of coming and going gradually shifted. His absences grew shorter, his presence at the trading post more consistent. He built a small dwelling of his own just outside the palisade, close enough to be considered part of the trading post community, yet separate enough to maintain his independence. The children thrived in this unconventional arrangement. Thomas followed Maka whenever permitted, learning hunting, tracking, and wilderness survival with an enthusiasm that reminded Rebecca painfully of how he had once shadowed Daniel. Sophia split her time between helping Rebecca with various tasks and joining the boys in their outdoor activities, her once silent nature blossoming into quiet confidence. Baptiste's sons benefited as well. Jean-Paul's initial resistance to education had transformed into genuine intellectual curiosity, particularly for mathematics and geography. Louis, the younger, showed remarkable aptitude for languages, eagerly, learning both French from his father and Cheyenne words from Mahka. One evening in late June, as fireflies began to illuminate the twilight, Rebecca sat on the small bench Baptiste had constructed outside the main building, watching the children chase the glowing insects across the courtyard. Maka joined her, his presence familiar and comforting after the long months of growing closeness. "Beautiful sight," he observed, nodding toward the laughing children. "Spirits bright like fireflies." Rebecca smiled, warmed by the poetic observation. "They've healed so much since winter. I feared Thomas might never laugh like that again after his father died." "Children resilient," Maka said, "like spring grass after snow, need only chance to grow again." They sat in companionable silence, watching as Baptiste emerged from the trading room to call the children in for the evening meal. The trader caught Rebecca's eye and gave a knowing nod before herding the protesting group indoors, leaving her and Maka alone in the gathering dusk. "Thomas asked question today," Maka said after a moment. "Important question." "Oh?" Rebecca turned toward him, curious. "Asked if Maka would be father to him and Sophia." He spoke the words carefully, watching for her reaction. Said missed having father, wanted one again. Rebecca felt her heart constrict, both touched by her son's directness and alarmed by the implications. "What did you tell him?" "Said such things not for Maka alone to decide." He met her gaze steadily in the fading light. Said must talk, with mother first. The moments stretched between them, heavy with meaning. The path they had been circling for months had suddenly become explicit, unavoidable. Rebecca took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "And what would you say if it were for you alone to decide?" Maka's expression softened, revealing an emotion he rarely displayed so openly. "Would say yes, would be honored to guide Thomas, protect Sophia. He paused, then added more quietly, to walk path beside Rebecca. Her breath caught at the simple declaration. No flowery proposal, no grand promises, just an honest expression of what he felt, what he wanted. It was so characteristic of him, and so moving precisely because of its straightforwardness. "The world would not make it easy for us," she said, giving voice to the concern that had lingered even as their feelings had deepened. "For you, for me, for the children." "World rarely makes important things easy," Maka replied. "Question is whether worth fighting for." Rebecca reached out, taking his hand in hers, a boldness that would have shocked her just months ago. "When Martha Prescott cast us out, I thought our lives were over. I couldn't see any path forward, any future for my children." She squeezed his fingers gently. "You showed us another way. You taught us to survive, to find strength I didn't." "No, I had." Maka turned his hand to clasp hers properly, the gesture symbolic of their cultures meeting, connecting. "Rebecca taught Maka too," he said, "taught that solitude not always answer, that heart can heal, can open again after great loss." The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. This man, who had lost his entire community, who had retreated into solitude rather than face more pain, had risked opening himself to them, to her. The courage of that choice humbled her. "Yes," she said finally, her voice clear and certain in the twilight. "My answer is yes, for Thomas, for Sophia, for myself." Maka's response was not in words, but in action. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question as much as an expression of feeling. Rebecca answered by drawing closer, her free hand coming up to touch his face, feeling the contours that had become so dear to her. When they parted, a sense of rightness settled over her, a certainty that transcended the doubts and fears society would try to impose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality for Rebecca. The shift in her relationship with Maka was subtle, yet profound. Small touches exchanged when passing, meaningful glances across the trading post courtyard, quiet conversations under the stars after the children were asleep. Nothing inappropriate, nothing that would scandalize even the most proper observer, yet the connection between them was undeniable and deepening daily. Baptiste observed the developments with gruff approval, having long since concluded that Rebecca and Maka were good for each other. "About time," was his only comment when they finally spoke to him about their intentions, was wondering how long you'd dance around what everyone else could plainly see. The children's reactions varied. Thomas was triumphant, having orchestrated the outcome he desired through his direct question to Maka. Sophia accepted the news with solemn consideration before asking in her still sparse speech whether this meant Maka would stay forever now. When assured that was indeed the case, she smiled with rare brilliance and declared it good. Jean-Paul and Louis, having grown fond of Maka during his extended stays at the trading post, seemed pleased by the arrangement, though Jean-Paul affected teenage indifference to what he termed adult concerns. As summer progressed, plans gradually took shape. Maka and Baptiste, with Thomas's eager assistance, began expanding the small dwelling outside the palisade into a proper cabin that could accommodate Rebecca and the children. The structure incorporated elements of both cultures. The practical layout of a settler's cabin with adaptations drawn from Cheyenne lodge design for better ventilation and heat retention. Rebecca found herself collecting items for their new home with a sense of joy she hadn't felt since before Daniel's death. She sewed curtains from fabric Baptiste traded for fashioned simple furniture from wood Marka provided, and planted a kitchen garden that combined traditional European vegetables with native plants Marka showed her how to cultivate. The work was not without challenges. Word of their unusual arrangement spread through the network of traders and travelers who passed through Baptiste's post. Some reacted with disapproval, others with curiosity, a few with open hostility. A group of trappers from the east refused to trade with Injun lovers, taking their business elsewhere despite Baptiste's reputation for fair dealing. More painful was the reaction of a missionary and his wife who stopped at the trading post in late July. The minister, upon learning of Rebecca's plans to marry Marka, took it upon himself to lecture her on the spiritual dangers of such a union. His wife, meanwhile, made pointed comments about the children's moral upbringing and the confusion such a marriage would create for them. Rebecca endured the criticism with outward composure, though each barbed word stung. That night, after the missionary party had retired to the guest quarters, she found Marka outside, gazing at the star-filled sky, as was his habit. "Perhaps they're right," she said softly, her earlier certainty temporarily shaken by the day's confrontations. "Perhaps we're being selfish, thinking only of our feelings and not of what the children will face." Marka turned to her, his expression somber in the moonlight. "Children already face world as it is, not as we wish it to be. Thomas bears red hair like flame, draws eyes wherever goes." Sophia's silence marked her different even before found voice again. He took her hands in his. "Difference already their path. Question is whether walk it afraid and alone, or strong and together." The wisdom of his perspective steadied her. Yes, her children would face challenges no matter what choices she made. The key was equipping them to meet those challenges with confidence and resilience, not sheltering them from every difficulty. "You're right," she acknowledged. "And the missionary is wrong about one thing. You've given the children something they desperately needed: stability, safety, the knowledge that not all bonds can be broken by death or convenience." Marka nodded, understanding the reference to the Prescott's betrayal. Some bonds grow stronger when tested, like metal in fire. Rebecca leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Like ours. The missionary left the following day, his disapproval evident in his stiff farewell. Rebecca watched the wagon depart with mixed emotions. Relief at seeing the last of his judgment, sadness that such narrow thinking still shaped so much of the world around them. "Don't let it trouble you overmuch," Baptiste advised, noting her pensive expression. "Men like that see only what their books tell them to see, not what's before their eyes." "I know," Rebecca sighed, "but there will be others like him. Many others." "Yes," the trader agreed candidly, "but fewer out here than in the settlements. Frontier has a way of teaching practical tolerance. Man cares less about his neighbor's arrangements when that neighbor might be the only help for 50 miles when trouble comes." His pragmatic perspective cheered her somewhat. They were creating their own community here, one based on mutual respect and practical cooperation rather than rigid social conventions. It wasn't perfect, but perhaps it was better in some ways than the world she had left behind. August brought the completion of their cabin, a sturdy structure with 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and windows that caught the morning sunlight. Moving day arrived with a sense of ceremony, the children carrying their few possessions across the short distance from the trading post to their new home with solemn importance. That evening, as they prepared the first meal in their new dwelling, Rebecca was struck by how far they had come since those desperate days in the wilderness. From near death to new life, from despair to hope, from isolation to connection. The journey had transformed them all, reshaping them into something stronger and more resilient than before. "Happy?" Marka asked quietly. observing her thoughtful expression as she arranged cooking utensils on the shelf he had built. "Yes," she said simply. "More than I thought possible again." The actual ceremony joining them took place in early September, as summer began to yield to autumn's first touch. It was neither a traditional white wedding nor a Cheyenne ritual, but something new, created to honor both heritages. Baptiste officiated, his authority as the nearest thing to law in the region sufficient for their purposes. Jean-Paul and Louis stood as witnesses, along with two friendly trappers who happened to be trading at the post. Thomas presented Marca with his father's pocket watch, a gesture that brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. "Pa would want you to have it," the boy said with simple certainty, "to remind you that time is precious, like he always said." Marca accepted the gift with appropriate solemnity, recognizing the symbolic passing of protective responsibility. It represented. For Sophia, he had carved a small wooden fox, reminiscent of his own spirit totem, which she clutched throughout the ceremony with shining eyes. Rebecca wore a dress of soft buckskin that combined elements of both cultures, cut in a style familiar to her, but adorned with Cheyenne beadwork that Marca had taught her to create during the summer evenings. Her hair hung loose down her back, woven with small wildflowers gathered by Sophia that morning. The vows they exchanged were simple, honest promises to walk life's path together, to protect and support each other and the children, to face whatever challenges arose as one. No mention of obedience or submission, just partnership, respect and love, freely given and received. As Baptiste pronounced them husband and wife according to the laws of nature and the customs of the frontier, Rebecca felt a sense of completion, of circles closing and new ones beginning. The path that had seemed so dark and hopeless that winter day when Martha Prescott closed her door against them had led, through suffering and struggle, to this unexpected joy. Later, as they celebrated with a feast prepared by all who had witnessed the ceremony, Baptiste raised his cup in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his mismatched eyes crinkling at the corners, "and to the wisdom of Great Spirit, or God, or whatever power brings the right people together at the right time." Rebecca, seated beside Marca with the children gathered around them, felt the truth of those words resonate deep within her heart. Their meeting had been no accident, a widow and her children lost in the wilderness, a solitary warrior who had withdrawn from the world in his grief. Somehow, the very brokenness they each carried had created the possibility for healing, for building something new and strong from the fragments of what had been lost. As twilight deepened into night, the celebration continued around them. Thomas demonstrated the tracking skills Marca had taught him to an impressed audience of trappers. Sophia sat with Louis, heads bent together over the fox carving as she explained its significance in careful words. Jean-Paul helped Baptiste distribute the specially traded coffee that marked the occasion as particularly significant. Marca's hand found Rebecca's under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become familiar and precious. "New life begins," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Like spring after longest winter." Rebecca squeezed his hand, remembering the bitter cold of that February day when hope had seemed lost forever. "Not just survival now," she agreed, "but living, really living." Around them, their unlikely family continued to celebrate. French crow trader, Cheyenne warrior, settler children, all brought together by circumstances that might have destroyed them, but instead had forged connections stronger than blood or tradition. It wasn't the future Rebecca had once envisioned, but as she looked at the faces illuminated by firelight, at the happiness that had emerged from tragedy, she knew it was the future they were meant to find. The winds that had once cut like a blade through her threadbare dress now carried the promise of harvest, of abundance, of seasons turning as they should. The road ahead might not be easy. Prejudice and misunderstanding would always exist, but they would face it together, drawing strength from each other, creating their own path through the wilderness of life. And that, Rebecca reflected as she looked up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, was more than enough. More than she had dared to hope for when all seemed lost. More than mere survival. It was, at last, the chance to truly live. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.